Mint Salad and I Saw Dr. No. It is directed by Terrence Young, and if you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. By the way, this is the first James Bond movie. Yeah, I'm going back that far, and I'm going to review all of James Bond. So if you're interested in that, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and it's time to do some bonding. It's bonding time. This movie starts and a guy gets assassinated. He's very important. He's part of the M16s, and you know, he's got a very important position. And so it's up to James Bond. He gets called in. No, actually, he has to get found because he's so cool that he is very hard to be discovered, where his location's at, all that fun jazz. And so the agency have to do a bunch of things and such, and a bunch of series of events. They have to do that, and it's enjoyable to see people try to get in contact with James Bond, but alas, they get in contact with James Bond. They're like, yo, you gotta go to Jamaica, man. You know what's up? You wanna know why? It's because you have to see what's going on over there. Clearly somebody's after our guys, and so that's what James Bond does. Fascinating thing about the James Bond series, from the very first movie, he does not say shaken, not stirred. What it is a waiter comes and says, yo, here's your order, like you requested, shaken, not stirred, which implies that he is A, said this a lot, and B, has probably in the past reprimanded the waiter for not saying what James Bond has ordered in the past. So this has happened multiple times that he's asked for this. But James Bond did not ask himself in this movie, just for notes, just for history's sake, history keepsaking. What I love about this movie is immediately he gets on the plane and somebody's trying to kill him. And of course, he sleeps with a woman, he woos a woman, and then somebody tries to kill him, and so he tries to escape from the person trying to kill him, and I really like it. First of all, I gotta mention the colors. They're very vibrant, they're very bright. The colors, beautiful. Mwah. The 60s, very heavily saturated colors. I like the colors a lot. The colors, they make me feel like I'm on the beach right now. And all the sunset colors, any beautiful landscape, full range of colors in this movie, which I like a lot. So anyway, we got James Bond. He's going to Jamaica, and a guy is unsuccessful in his attempt to get James Bond. And of course, James Bond goes on to the island, is very skeptical. But what's interesting is he has to boat in, and he has this lady friend that he's like hanging out with. He sleeps with 3 lady friends in this movie. I think I should start an official James Bond's lady counter. Starting with this movie, she sleeps with 3 women in the first movie. And so this is official now. All right, keep track in the comments for me, because I'm not going to remember it all. Thank you, please and thank you. So, James Bond takes this lady, notices that there's a guys coming in boats that are probably going to shoot him, and so pushes her into this mound, this natural mound, and when there's a bunch of machine bullets, he's like, yeah, we're protected. Hell yeah, we're getting protection over here. And so I liked that part. I was like, man, James Bond is a very intuitive person, and he's so cool and calm and collected with everything he does. He's so amazing. I love James Bond's character immediately. This man, Sean Connery, man, he is a really good looking man. And I'm like, man, this is a cool guy. I think all men should aspire to be Sean Connery men in the 60s. So I'm like, this is cool. I like this guy. And so we got this lady, she's also hanging out with him while he goes to this nice little suite room. But first they have to go through this decontamination process, which takes them getting naked. And you get a little glimpses and shots of the lady being naked, and it's awesome. There's a part where you can see her naked but you can't really make out what's there. It's just the furthest distance where you can make any detail out. But you know, it's a lady there, and then she gets covered in a towel, and it's pretty decent, and I like it. So I like this lady. She's there, she's hanging out. You know what's up with Dr. No? Dr. No be like, yo, I don't have a hand. Radiation damage. I'm super into radiation. Also, by the way, I bought this entire island, and I'm just gonna keep doing my research, and I don't care about the island at all. And so James Bond is like, we gotta get rid of that. So he figures out a way to sabotage their daily procedures for the radiation projects, makes it super radiated water, and then he like dumps Mr. No in there, and then James Bond escapes, and it's pretty miraculous. I'm like, how are you going to do it? And even though it looks treacherous, I'm like, man, this looks hard. How is he going to get out? I just know intuitively that James Bond is going to get out, and he does. And I really like the stunt where he's in the pipe and he's got water over him. I'm like, man, is he not drowning? That's crazy that he's not drowning. And so I like this movie. It's a good one, and James Bond is going to get another request, and I'm excited to watch the next James Bond movie. What do you think about this James Bond movie in the comments below? I feel like I said everything about this James Bond movie, honestly. I thought that this was going to be a little bit colder, but it's not. This is a good movie. I don't know what else to say about it other than it was vibrant. It really was a vibey movie. It made me feel so sad that movies aren't like this anymore, and it made me really appreciate like a set piece of a movie. This movie really takes place like we're on a play, and I'm like there in the room with James Bond, which I really think is cool about the movie being in the 60s, and it's pretty cool. I gotta give this film, it's pretty sick. It gets a 7.77 out of 10. I'm Inside, and I saw From Russia with Love. It is directed by Terrence Young, written by Richard Maybaum, and if you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts with following Spectre being very mad that James Bond killed one of the guys from last movie, and so they're trying to set him up in a trap. What I like about James Bond is that these people know that James Bond will know that this is a trap, but they also know that James Bond will want to walk directly into a trap because he knows that it's a trap and he wants a challenge. That's what I love about James Bond. So James Bond, he's like doing the whole moves like, oh, I'm in a trap. Oh no, crazy. I didn't see this coming from anywhere. So there's also this chick, right, who's kind of hanging out with him the entire time. Now these people, it's not Spectre directly in this movie. It's actually this Russian branch of government that's working for Spectre. Nobody really knows that this Russian branch is working for Spectre, including this chick who is deployed to hang out with James Bond pretty much the entire time of the movie. There is a moment, right, where James Bond gets suspicious of her and starts slapping her. I'm like, dude, this is so cool. Oh my goodness, James Bond. When you confront what you perceive as an enemy, you just decide to slap him. Later on, reveal that this chick didn't even know that she was working for Spectre. She's working for Mother Russia, and she loves Mother Russia, so James Bond shouldn't be slapping her, silly. And I don't know if James Bond ever apologizes. I don't remember him apologizing one bit. No, he's not an apologetic fellow. The entire time, James is trying to get to the Lecter, and he thinks that the chick that he's hanging out with is the trick to get the Lecter. And then when he figures out the chick is not really the way to get the Lecter, but instead you got some shady business dealings with Spectre and some other guys, and James Bond has to steal the Lecter from those guys. And then he does, and he has sex with her on a boat, and it's pretty neat. Oh boy, this From Russia with Love, I told you basically what happened, but I really feel you just have to watch the movie if you haven't seen the movie. The way that everything is set up is just so expert tier. The very 41st minutes of the movie is just set up for the last half of the movie. First 40 minutes, he gets his little cool little gadgets. I especially like the suitcase because it's very specific on which way you have to turn the little
knobs at the top, or else something will explode. And it's pretty great. In this movie, James Bond has sex with 5 different chicks. 6 times, but one of the chicks is 2 times. And also he has sex with 2 chicks at once at some point. And I'm like, yo, get him. There is a point where James Bond has to determine which 2 chicks won this fight that they're having in order to fight for a man, and he's supposed to decide why. Who gave him the role? Who gave him the permission to decide? Well, I know actually who gave him the permission. It was like somebody high up in that village. How much history does James Bond and this guy have, to the point where this guy is going to appoint James Bond as somebody to decide who won? Oh boy. So this movie, there's a lot of shooting, a lot of fun gun violence stuff, a lot of different types of stuff happening in this movie, from like chicks fighting each other to like trains. There's a lot of train in this movie. I like this movie having a lot of trains. I like how James Bond is sitting in a train a lot. And I feel like the final conflict happens in the train. Not the final conflict, like the climax conflict. And then there's the conflict that happens after the climax where it's like, well, the enemy is actually not down yet because of rules. It's kind of like horror movie rules in that way. Nobody is actually truly down in a James Bond movie unless he shoots them. And then, yeah, he just has sex with that lady at the end. This is a fun movie. I quite enjoyed it. It's very vibrant in color. This movie is a lot less vibrant than Dr. No, but I do like the color palette. There's more of like fixed color palette, more of a like intentional color palette, versus the last one is just kind of like nature or whatever. This one, there's a lot of blues. There's a decent amount of oranges, and all the people are wearing colors that support this. And then of course greens with like the background and all that fun jazz. Not a ton of color palette deviation in this movie, which I appreciate. And also Sean Connery is a great James Bond. I like him. He's suave. Those one-liners, man. How? Oh man. I think those one-liners would get me as a woman if he used one of those one-liners on me that Sean Connery's James Bond does on his women that he frequently has sex with. That would work on me. Use those one-liners if you haven't to pick up a chick. What do you think of From Russia with Love? Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Who is your favorite James Bond movie? Who is your favorite James Bond? I gotta give this, it's a 7.67 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Goldfinger. It is directed by Guy Hamilton, written by Richard Maybaum, and also Paul Den. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts, we're following James Bond, and he's hooking up with a chick. However, it's not depicted that they have sex on screen. Does it count to the sex counter if we don't see James Bond having sex on screen? That was my first thought when I saw him flirting with Jill Masterson. And then, guess what? A chick gets gold. She's completely covered in gold paint. Touch of the Goldfinger, you might say. There's something bigger going on here, and it's up to James Bond to find out what the heck is going on. I swear, James Bond stumbles into some plans that always happen. He's not initially aware of it. His organization gets a glimpse of it, and James Bond is like, now it's time for me to go and attack and grab whatever enemies are happening. And I like James Bond's methods, and I'm just grabbing snowflakes. It's snowing in Kentucky, by the way. This movie takes place in Kentucky. What's interesting about this movie is it takes place in Fort Knox, and there's a gold reserve here. I didn't know there's a gold reserve here. The KFC they go to in the movie is in Miami. I'm at the first ever KFC. It's kind of disappointing that they didn't go to the very first KFC, but whatever. Budgets, I guess. There's a gold smuggling scheme, and guess what? Spectre's behind it all. We get a nice little glimpse of the organization called Spectre. We got number 1, his face is hidden, and number 11 sucks, so number 10, number 9 dies for it. I like number 1's tactics of keeping everyone in control because he never outright shocks or eliminates or takes them off the battlefield, whatever you want to say, for murders them, he always does the person next to them. I think it's to inspire fear in the person that has done the wrongdoing. Because if they do the wrongdoing, you know what, I don't understand this idea either, because what if you're always doing the wrongdoing? People around you always die. But if you do right and somebody next to you does wrong, then you die? It's very evil. Obviously, incredibly evil. There is no humanity in it. It definitely feels like it's to execute members and to keep a nice, fresh rotation of members going in and out of Spectre. And I think it's also to create accountability between its members, like, hey, you better make sure that this person next to you is doing their job right, otherwise your life is on the line. We also meet Pussy Galore. I love her name. I'm dressed up like Pussy Galore right now, and I like how it's snowing. We got James Bond is chasing her the entire time. James Bond doesn't really get her successfully until the very end, and it seems like they do be sleeping together. So I like this dynamic. I like how James Bond is chasing her. It's a catch. James Bond is usually really outright seductive, flirty with chicks that he wants to sleep with, and then they end up sleeping together. Like that moment, oh my goodness, he just goes away forever. But with Pussy Galore, he's chasing her because Pussy Galore, but she learns that she's being tricked and is turned to Bond's side, and then number one is like, yo, I caught you, haha, I'm gonna torture you, which I do like. Also, they're smelting down the gold, putting it in a bunch of wrapping stuff around it. Gold-plated cars, stuff like that. Driving it across borders, smelting it, and then reselling it. That's what they're doing. That's their whole scheme. It costs a lot of money, so they're doing a bunch of smuggling. I love how much smuggling and stealing Spectre is doing. It's just so evil of them, and I love it. You gotta appreciate Spectre's organization, man. Oh my goodness, I don't know how I could be that organized. I couldn't be the leader of an organization like that. However, I could be a really good member because I can follow instructions well. That is my strength. James Bond, though, he has to stop Goldfinger. Before I go on, I made a mistake in Dr. No. I said M16, it's MI6. Oops, I was thinking of the gun. I read what it was the organization called. I heard it and then I also saw it because I like to cement things visually and auditorily. That's just how I learn best. And I saw it and I was like, oh, it looks like it's like a 1. It's like, oh, it's an I. Oops, my bad. Anyway, the plan is take a radioactive device, put it in the gold, and set the gold radioaction to go and it's very radioactive. It makes it so the gold that Goldfinger currently has, this guy has, he has all the gold and it's gonna go like 10 times up in value. Honestly, I wanted to see this plan go through, but of course, James Bond thwarts this plan and it's spectacular. I really like this movie. It kept me engaged the entire time. I like how everything is gold themed. It's really thematic, and I noticed that with this one, there is more of a hard set color palette versus the other ones. Like this one, I feel like it chooses a few colors and then that's the main color, like say gold, and then there's like neutral colors and then a complementary color or like split complementary color, like say purple, and it's like neutral colors, and it makes it so the room is really poppin'. And not to mention that this feels like it's in the set, and I love things that are taking places in sets, and I love it. Mwah! I love it. This is really action-packed. I really enjoy Goldfinger. What do you think about Goldfinger? I really like the action. I really like everything about Goldfinger because it's pretty neat, and I like the chick, and I like how she's playing hard to get. That is really fun. It's really fun. The sex counter that James Bond has, I don't know if I technically count the first chick as having sex, although it's implied that they had sex. So I'm gonna say yes. So he has sex with 2 chicks in this movie. That's the official counter for Goldfinger. Let me know if I missed anything. What's your favorite thing about Goldfinger? What I'm talking about Goldfinger now is what I think about it most strongly, what I feel about it most strongly, is my opinion right here, right now. Whew, snow's nice. I wish the snow was gold though. I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 8 out of 10.
I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Thunderball. It is directed by Terrence Young, written by Richard Maybaum and John Hopkins. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts with an incredible plan to steal nukes. It's very convoluted, but it works. They have a guy change his face using surgery to look like a pilot of this ship. This ship is training and they're doing some test runs. He apparently knows a lot about how to fly a plane because he's imperceivable as anybody else other than the pilot, by the way. He has his own oxygen and he has this gas that he puts into the main oxygen tank, puts it in, and everyone starts breathing this oxygen concoction death gas, and they all just end up dying because not only does he take hijack of the plane and while they're all passed out, he lands in water. He has his own oxygen so he's not drowning, but all of these people, if they ever get anything other than the gas and they start getting oxygen again, then they're in the bottom of the ocean and their heads are exploding because of pressure. And then he's able to just go swim up and be saved, but that was his plan. But this dude, he asked for more money. And so he gets the money that he was given and he's like, oh, you're gonna give me more money, right? After, huh? And instead of being saved, he gets, there goes the cut of the oxygen, so that guy dies. You should have not asked for more money. You're betting that you have more power than you do with a bunch of evil guys, and lo and behold, you die. Good job. You could have been saved, but you didn't. Bad job. So now they take the nukes, and they have the original airplane, they cover it in like the disguise thingy under the water, and it's imperceivable. It's crazy how it's hard to see the plane. You can't see the plane at all from the sky. And now we got the nukes took us to a different location. Not to mention that now that they got the nukes secured, this organization's like, all right, now it's time for us to blackmail. Hey, we got these nukes. You give us money or else we're going to destroy a bunch of towns, okay? And of course, the governments are like, we have to adhere to their demands. And James Bond comes in. This is where James Bond comes in. He's tasked to find out some more information about what's going on here. And basically, the entire movie is water fight scenes. There's a lot of water in this. For a movie called Thunderball, there is a surprising lack of thunder and balls. Although James Bond has balls. But where are the thunderballs, man? I was expecting electricity. And there's no electricity. It's just everyone's just fighting underwater with spear guns. This movie kind of jumps the gun. It goes from kind of grounded, very chill, but very also cool. There's some spectacularness to it, but it's all an exaggeration of the best qualities of men. This movie, we just get introduced to wacky gadgets. He jetpacks. Where did the jetpack come from? And there's just a bunch of gadgets involved, and including this rebreather. He puts on his mouth and he breathes through his mouth, and I guess it takes oxygen from the water. I thought it was only 4 minutes that he could use it for. I see James Bond using that rebreather for longer than 4 minutes. He blackmails a chick to have sex with him. In total, he has sex with 3 chicks. And there's also Domino. She's very interested in getting James Bond, but also is against James Bond. So they have a little bit of a feud during out the entirety of the movie. And honestly, I like Domino. She's cute. I like how Domino eventually goes against Largo. That's the big bad guy. He has a cool eye patch. I like his look. He's very aesthetic. And I'm like, I like this movie. It's kind of wacky, but it's also rule of cool. I feel like this movie just embodies rule of cool. Seeing James Bond navigate the social climate
and also have to deal with a bunch of violent people against him. Pow, 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 and he always finds his way. The part of the movie that kind of is like an portion for me is how long the water fight scene is. I feel like it goes for too long and there's just too much water. I do like when James Bond eventually does find the plane and he's like, oh yeah, this was stolen. Oh, and it's underwater. Where did the nukes go? And then he has to find the nukes. He finds one nuke eventually. And then there's a lot of convoluted stuff he has to go through to get the second nuke. And then the second nuke is got. He gets Domino to kiss him. Wah. And then that's pretty much the end of the movie. It's really cold out here. I had not mentioned at all how cold it is out here, but it's 20 degrees and I have no arm things at all. I just wanted to cosplay as that chick with the boa, but I don't own a boa, so I'm wearing the closest thing to it. It's pretty cold out here, but what do you think of Thunderball? I enjoyed Thunderball. It's definitely a fun experience. I really like the blue dominant color palette of the movie, especially since it's taking place, a quarter of it takes place underwater. I like how simple it is for me to see which guy is bad, which guy is good. Obviously, Sean Connery does a great job with Love Is Zingers, and the chemistry between him and Domino and what changes with the relationship as time goes on, I liked that. So I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.9 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw You Only Live Twice. It is directed by Louis Gilbert, written by Roald Dahl. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. The gist of the movie is that someone is stealing a bunch of aircraft from space. This was 67, so of course we got the space races going on. I absolutely love the little death claw thing that just consumes the capsules in space like it's a shark. It's just like, oh. This is getting the attention of world government. It's up to James Bond to figure out who is behind this. The first thought is Japan, because, you know, it's in the Japan place. James Bond has to go undercover. There's multiple attempts on his life. He soon finds out it's actually Spectre is behind all of this. Spectre is trying to manufacture a war. Spectre is trying to frame Japan. Spectre is trying to cause a conflict that'll eventually make it so they get a bunch of money. That is always Spectre's motivation. The Bond girl in this, Aki, she's cute. Oh my goodness, I have such a soft spot for her. And when she wears that kimono of her, mwah, I love that kimono. This movie starts with him dying, or I guess a doppelganger, him faking his death, and then later on in the movie it's shown that everyone he's trying to fool about his death, nobody is fooled. They keep seeing James Bond. James Bond just keeps on doing the James Bond thing. Of course he gets caught, so Spectre is not at all fooled. Aki gets poisoned by this really cool method of poisoning, just taking the string and just dumping the poison down the string and so it drips in her mouth. And it's not messy at all. It's intended for Bond, but Bond shifts in his sleep. And it's good that he does that, because then she dies and Bond doesn't die. And honestly, Bond is more of a valuable asset than this lady. Sorry, lady. You're just a woman. James Bond is James Bond. It's implied that he had sex with the first lady, although it's not on screen. It's just on screen that he gets absolutely betrayed, and it's the after of sleeping with her. So I think I will count that as sleeping with her. In total, he sleeps with 3 women, and he has sex with Aki off screen because they're supposed to be a married duo. Married being undercover. It takes about 3 of those spaceship chomps. I'm just gonna call it that now. I don't know what else to call that chomping machine. The machine that consumes the capsule and then takes the capsule, puts it into Earth, and then hides the people inside in the capsule. What's the purpose? I guess smuggling, blackmail, or maybe some hostages. Evil things Spectre might think of. I don't have an evil brain, so I don't know what evil deeds this could be used for. It's really cold out here. It's 20 degrees and very windy. It's very cold. Just so you know, that's why I'm shivering and I sound like this. I should mention this is the last Sean Connery before he takes a departure in the next movie. I gotta say, I like Sean Connery in this, although he definitely has a different energy than the first movie for sure. In the first movie, he has a youthful flair to him, and he's, suave. He's been suave the entire time. However, he is definitely noticeably older in this one compared to Dr. No, where he's very young. Even if you're the same person throughout several years of playing the same character, you're going to change the performance a little bit because of your older sensibilities. And I feel like just in the most subtle ways, Sean Connery changes his portrayal of James Bond. I also forgot to mention the ninjas. Yeah, Bond partners with ninjas in the final battle, and the ninjas just go hard. They're going, "Grrr!" I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. We're doing ninjas. Man, this movie has a lot going on. I feel like there's a lot of locations that this movie bounces from, and it takes place in Japan, which I totally get, and they show me ninjas, which is pretty cool. But I feel like if this had a little bit less going on, but was more focused on the central idea of what's happening in the movie, somebody's stealing the capsules from space, and I know that James Bond is focusing on this the entire time, but I feel like the side plots are a little bit unnecessary. The whole ninja thing, oh man, it's a lot to introduce when you also have introduced the idea of space travel, and James Bond is trying to become an astronaut and pretend to be an astronaut, and he's only thwarted by accidentally carrying an air conditioning unit, and number one of Spectre is like, yo, why are you doing this? You're obviously not an astronaut. And then we get this cool epic fight scene where number one ends up dying, rip number one. But also it shows a scar. This is a pretty gnarly scar. This is the first ever reveal of Blofeld, aka number one. I just like number one more personally. Blofeld. There's a reason why you're not called number one and not Blofeld. That's a weird name. James Bond defeats number one, and of course with Spectre, the organization will keep on going with a new leader. It's really cold out here. What do you think of You Only Live Twice? I like the title because he fakes his death at the very beginning of the movie, and this is his second life, which is pretty fun. It was very convincing. I also thought he died at the very beginning, but then it showed that he wasn't dead, which is pretty cool. He was able to escape via a Navy funeral, which I find to be very clever. Also is flirting with Moneypenny. Man, just have sex with her already. Come on, James Bond. I think you're a little bit lacking. You need to hit that. She is sending signals. But I get it. It's business. Don't mix business with pleasure. So I've got to give this film, it's a solid 6.8 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw On Your Majesty's Secret Service. It is directed by Peter R. Hunt, written by Richard Maybaum. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts with following James Bond, and he's chasing a woman. And this woman's in a car, and he's also in a car. He's chasing her down a hill, and I've noticed that this hill has been featured in a couple other James Bond films. I don't remember which ones, but this is a very well-used, well-oiled hill. James Bond, he chases this woman into the ocean, and she tries to drown herself. James Bond saves her. She's like, no, I want to die. And I'm thinking, this woman's being very dramatic. James Bond, luckily, he has all the charisma in the world, and they about to hook up. Oh, let's go hook up at a hotel. And Bond agrees, and he goes to the hotel, and guess what? There's an attacker. This woman denies knowing anything about the attacker. Bond knows better. He knows women. He loves women, but also, I don't know if he hates women. I think he hates women. He gets kidnapped, and this man, at the end of the kidnapping, at the very end, James Bond's like, hey, what am I being kidnapped for? And this man's like, I have a proposal. Can you marry my daughter? Is James Bond so popular that fathers are trying to get their daughters to marry James Bond? And since he's so rare, they have to kidnap and bribe him. And he's like, no, man, I'm a bachelor. James Bond does not care about any of this. He cares about following Blofeld. It's been about 2 years since the last movie. Also, I should mention that it's no longer Sean Connery. George Lazenby, I don't like him as James Bond. He feels a little bit too out of character for me. He's too sexually aggressive. He's too cockish towards his boss, except for later in the movie when he's arguing with his boss. And it feels like when he's arguing with his boss, it's more from an emotional standpoint, less so from a suave standpoint that Sean Connery has. James Bond is able to find out where Spectre has all of this goodness that James Bond is looking for, and he's looking for the specific spot in the snow, hence why I'm in the snow. There's a lot of hot chicks there. I like how they capture James Bond and then they lock him up. They put him in this like weird place where he has to try to escape, and then he gets caught in a bunch of gears and he's almost crushed by a bunch of gears, but luckily he's able to escape. And there's times where he's hanging from the wire and it's just tricky. I see him use the pockets and I think that's really clever, but also, ow, how? It's really cold. How you're not numb? And of course he's able to not to die, and he's able to escape and then ski down, and then you have the ski down thing. And then he goes back up and like tries to rendezvous with some chicks, even though some chicks are trying to rendezvous with him. And then there's the part in the movie where it gets really boring and it gets slow. And even though there's a bunch of hot chicks in the room, I feel like the momentum is not there. So there's no momentum, but there's a lot of plot points that are happening. There's a lot going on, but there's no momentum. It's a really weird feeling at this point of the movie. I'm like, okay, cool, I like how you're skiing on one ski, James Bond, because your other one ends up breaking. But then you go up again, and I'm like, why? What's going on here? I don't understand. The entire time he's going after Blofeld, and he's looking at Blofeld going down this bobsled. He's like, I'm gonna do that, and it looks fun. And so he does that, and Blofeld ends up dying. And then it's kind of weird how there's a chick who appears and is like, hey, by the way, I'm your wife. Or she doesn't even say, I'm your wife. She appears in James Bond's life, and then the way that James Bond acts towards her is just like any other Bond woman. But apparently they're like fiancé and married or something. They get hitched. Miss and Mrs. Bond, they get onto a merry thing, a wedding. They get into a nice little car. They stop on the side of the road. He's putting in a bunch of flowers into the car. I don't know why he stopped. There's not really any particular reason why. And then there's a drive-by shooting, and it shoots the woman in the head. And then that's the end of the movie. So I feel like the last half is just like, what is going on? / I know what's going on. This is so freaking boring. / wow. I feel so wish-washy about how I'm feeling about this. On one hand, I feel this is a really cool ending. It's impactful. It's like, wow, I can't believe that just happened. But on the other hand, I just feel like it comes out of nowhere. I don't like how it just comes out of nowhere. It doesn't feel set up to me. I personally wish that this movie was better paced. It just feels like it's dragging its feet, even with the awesome action scenes. Too much of it. So much of it, and I hate the guy's British voice. It's too British. Not enough Scottish. It's just too aggressive. It's different. He's just a different James Bond to me. It's hard for me to think this is a Sean Connery, even though he's cast to look exactly like Sean Connery. And this takes place after the last movie, and the movie after this takes place after this one. But this just doesn't feel like Sean Connery. This is a different universe. I'm not even going to try to think about this as a good movie in the James Bond universe. What do you think about this movie? Do you love it? Do you hate it? I like some parts, but other parts are just weird to me. But I think it's most appropriate at a 6.7 out of 10.
I'm so salad, mint salad, and I saw Diamonds Are Forever. It is directed by Guy Hamilton, written by Richard Maybaum and Tom Mankiewicz. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. Sean Connery is back. Oh boy, I hope Sean Connery stays. This movie is set after the last one, which didn't star Sean Connery, but this one stars Sean Connery. So Sean Connery got married and his wife got killed at the very end, and so he's after Blofeld now. He uncovers a scheme Blofeld has been playing for years, facial skin surgery to make everyone look like each other. That's why the scar was different from the last movie versus the movie prior to that one. They're all getting face surgery. We're introduced to 2 gay assassins. I suspect that they're working for Blofeld, but it's never directly confirmed that they are. It's just implied. I like it when they hold hands. It's adorable. Very progressive for its time. I like how they go around assassinating people, and I guess that's their love language. Anyway, there's this diamond smuggling scheme going on, and James Bond accidentally stumbles upon this scheme. I like how they smuggle diamonds. They hide the diamonds in the body of a corpse. How clever is that? Nobody's gonna want to reach in and grab diamonds from a corpse. Bond is recruited in a mission to stop diamond smuggling by partaking in it with fake diamonds. He's supposed to go undercover as Peter Franks. However, there's a tell that James Bond is very unique to having. He says, Franks. Peter Franks, like Bond, James Bond. No normal person introduces themselves like James Bond does, so that's an immediate tell, and I wonder how nobody got that at all. I guess these people don't really know James Bond that well. There's an epic scene where James Bond is doing the dastardly deed of giving these criminals fake diamonds, and then he's knocked out, placed into the funeral box, and sent through the cremator, and it seems like he's not gonna have any way to get out. I'm like, how is James Bond gonna get out of this? And then I felt this was a little cheap. The people receiving the diamonds realized they were fake, and so they pulled James Bond out to interrogate him. I would have just left James Bond in the furnace box. Why did you bother bringing him back to question him? You didn't get that much information out of him, did you? Not to mention that now he's got the upper hand because he's James Bond. He always finds a way. They also got to travel to Vegas. I like the car chase scene in Vegas with all the cops chasing him. Look at Vegas in the late 60s compared to Vegas now. Whoo boy, it's so different. For one, the population density is pretty much none. Compared to now, there's just population everywhere. The chase scene happening in this movie could not happen in modern day strip traffic, especially at night. You see how jammed packed the strip is? I never drive near the strip because of how terrible the traffic is. I just park a few miles back or park a few blocks away from where I need to go and then walk or Uber. I wish I had that type of traffic in my life, but unfortunately we don't. Rip the past. Now I'm sad. Also, speaking of Vegas, James Bond meets Penny O'Toole. What a great name. I love the names of all of these chicks in the movies. Pussy Galore, Penny O'Toole. They're just women objectifying names, and I love it. He's flirting with this chick the entire time. She's like, I don't want to give into your temptation, until Bond eventually convinces her to go against her master. Her master kind of convinces her, but she's very non-committal to anything. She's not definitively being on Bond's side in this movie. Compared to other Bond girls in the past who have been more committal, full-on commit to James Bond when they switch sides, she's playing things a little bit more smart and low-key. I also like when Bond was sneaking into that research facility center and he comes out of it with a moon buggy. I'm like, wait, what? He has a moon buggy from when they faked the moon landing? There's actually a set of the moon in there. And all these people are just in rough terrain driving while he's driving a moon buggy. And I guess that's best for the Nevada terrain that there is. It's pretty epic. I like it. And I like when they crash the
things go explode. I feel like in this movie, things just unneedlessly explode when things collide. It's so cool, but yo, it's not how explosions work. Bond eventually uncovers some plans by the head honcho Diamond Man to make a laser satellite for weapon uses. Of course, it's always weapon uses, and Bond shuts it down. Good old Bond. I like how this movie moves from east to west, because from Vegas, and now we're in Baja, California, where the oil rig device is happening, and he goes kablowy. Where did he get these explosives? I don't know. I do like the last plot was a cake hidden in a bomb. I thought that was clever. But then Bond just immediately throws it overboard because now they're on a cruise. I felt like this movie was really scattershot in all the locations that they used. Not really a proper introduction to all the locations. It's like, oh, now we're going to Vegas. Why? Don't know. Wait, how'd you get a car? Why are you outside of Vegas all of a sudden? I don't understand where the connection is from point A to point B. How did you get there? There's a lot going on in this movie. I feel like Sean Connery is done with the role. The way that he plays James Bond is just so different from the first James Bond. It's kind of a different character for me, and he just feels not like he's James Bond, but that he's just reading a script and that he's being paid. And I know that he didn't really like being James Bond, but he did get paid a lot of money to be in this one. How many times does James Bond have sex? He has sex with one chick twice, and then there's a chick who he starts making out with, and then she dies. Rip. I feel like James Bond is having sex with all the women that he can because they could just die next to him or near him or the day after they see him. Who knows? The first interaction that people have with him, they end up dying afterwards, or they are in a precarious, dangerous situation. So it makes sense that James Bond is just like, I'm just gonna sleep with him, okay? YOLO. Well, I guess YOLO. You only live twice instead of once? How would I say that out loud? Anyway, this is a doozy of a movie. It's fun action-wise. I just feel like the amount of locations used muddy the story a little bit for me. And also the story, I like how simple and overarching it is. It's just to bust a diamond heist plot, which is pretty cool. But then the whole laser thing, I was like, wait, why? This wasn't quite revealed at all until the very end. It kind of feels like the screenwriters were like, okay, well, I guess we gotta put something bigger towards the end of this, because we have built up to a climax, and if there's not something cool and big, then who cares? The women were hot. The car chase scenes in this one were peak, but everything else was just kind of for me. So I think I'm gonna get this one, it's a solid 6.8 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Live or Let Die. It is directed by Guy Hamilton, written by Tom Mankiewicz. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This is Roger Moore. No more Sean Connery. Rip Sean Connery. However, Roger Moore, upon watching this movie, I started to like him. And then by the very, very end of the movie, I was like, oh my goodness, he's better than Sean Connery. And I'll tell you why, but later. This movie starts and 3 M16, M1, MI6. I've been pronouncing it wrong, so now I just have forgotten how to pronounce it. MI6, M16, whatever. The organization, 3 of them are dead. 1 man's behind it. Who is the man behind it? It's up to James Bond to know. What I like about this entire movie is the interaction structure in which James Bond and the main villain have. James Bond is working for the British government. He goes down to Jamaica, he goes into cars, and it seems like every single car that James Bond goes into in this movie, the driver is working for the bad guy. Each time they try to do some new maneuver to either make James Bond pass out or to restrain him. This guy has a chick who reads tarot cards. She pulls tarot cards and she keeps pulling the card lovers. She's like, what does this mean? What's going to happen to me? And James Bond convinces her to sleep with him, even though she knows better. She knows that if she were to sleep with James Bond, her power to read the future via the tarot cards would disappear. And that the person that she's working for, which is the bad guy, she would get murdered. And yet, the allure of James Bond is so great that she can't resist sleeping with him.
with all of that in mind. And of course, she loses the power to read the future with her tarot cards. And it's kind of sad how the tarot card future teller works. First of all, what are tarot cards? I keep seeing them in pop culture, especially the past couple of years. Maybe it's just because I'm exposed to them, obviously, because tarot cards seem to be a very old concept. Oh wow, pull a card and you get to predict the future. That's as old as time. Humans love to fantasize about the future. What could happen? What could this thing mean? What could this thing mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? That's just like human nature, bro. So it makes sense that tarot cards exist. I just don't personally believe in them. Oh yeah, cat and mouse chase. So every time that James Bond goes into a car, it's usually somebody working for the head honcho, and this head honcho seems to be trying to get James Bond to meet up with him, and James Bond is trying to meet up with him. James Bond is also always trying to leave the situation. He's always trying to leave these cars that these people put him in, or these restraining situations. He's always trying to leave. But these people are actually helping James Bond get closer to the head honcho. But he doesn't realize it. So the entire time, you just see a demonstration of this guy's wealth and power and influence. Not even force. He's not forcing anybody to do anything. I'm sure he's paying them well. It also seems that everything that James Bond does, this guy has totally accounted for and is 2 steps ahead. James Bond might think that he's in control, but actually this guy is in complete control and he's moving James Bond in the way that he wants. And I think that is awesome. I don't think we've had a villain like that before, especially with such great power and influence. There have been wealthy guys in the past, but they've been kind of reclusive, or they're mostly focused on some sort of scientific experiment, so they're not focused on influencing the community. This guy, he is super duper into influencing the community, and that's why he has so much power, and that's why James Bond is so much in danger when he's in Jamaica. And speaking of Jamaica, I like how in this movie it focuses more on the inland shots versus the beach shots. Dr. No has a lot of beach shots. If you want to see the beach of Jamaica, go watch that movie. This is about the grass and the wetlands and so many palm trees, probably a bunch of mosquitoes in Jamaica. This guy's doing a whole heroin thing, and I'm like, man, if you only waited 10 years and changed that drug from heroin to crack, you'd be in with the United States, baby. Got him. Yeah, he's smuggling heroin. The only exposure I have to heroin is train spotting. Train spotting doesn't make it seem like a very positive experience. But this guy is making bank. He's like, you know, here's the idea. We have a ton of heroin and we give it to a bunch of people for free. So they have to come back to us. They become addicts. The goal is to have double the amount of addicts by next year or 10 years from now. I forget the time frame, but it's a time frame, and he wants to double the amount of addicts in America. And I'm like, no, it's not a good idea. Our infrastructure is going to freaking collapse. And it's about how people are handling the drugs, not the drugs themselves. Just a clear distinction. There's also that guy with the claw hand. It's pretty creepy. I like how he can bend metal. It's pretty epic. It's terrifying. And there's also this train fight scene at the end when James Bond defeats the big bad honcho because he's selling heroin to everyone in America. That's no good. He's like giving free samples. I mean, I understand the idea. You want to get free samples so when they run out, they go to you for the drug because they know what your drug is. You know, that's the same thing with like Jimmy John's or anything that gives you stuff for free. That's the same. That's the concept, is that you want their product because you already got a taste of it. You're not going to buy something that you don't have the taste for. That's a little bit risky. Claw hands on the train and tries to get James Bond, and he pushes them out the train window. I'm like, that's so cool. And then the movie just ends on them riding a train. It's fun, this cat and mouse chase. I was more interested in the relationship between head honcho Badman and James Bond. Honestly, that was the most interesting part to me because I just kept noticing that James Bond was being duped the entire time. So in this one, he has sex with one chick and then makes out with a chick.
rip her, I guess. Definitely has sex with one chick twice. Surprisingly monogamous for our James Bond. He usually has sex with more than one chick in a movie, except for Goldeneye, I think, what it was, whatever. Anyway, what do you think of this movie? I like it a lot. It's a fun cat and mouse chase, and I feel like it adds some flair to the James Bond films that we haven't really seen, especially with Roger Moore's performance. I feel like he adds more depth to the character than Sean Connery did. Don't get me wrong, Sean Connery is a good James Bond. I feel like he's a good model, a good reference to the character of James Bond, or at least the starting character. But I feel like Roger Moore, he adds a little bit more depth to the character. And there are the normal James Bond quirks, but I feel like with the way that he carries himself, the way that he talks, the way that he acts, it just feels like he's embodying the character more than Sean Connery did. It feels like Sean Connery was just there for a paycheck, versus Roger Moore is like, yeah, I'm James Bond. Yes, here I am. I'm Bond. James Bond. He starts to say that a lot more in these movies. I'm Bond, James Bond, and he says that every time he introduces himself, versus in the earlier films, that's kind of more of a natural process that starts to develop, and then it's caught on. It's like, oh, we should use this phrase more, and then they do for the rest of the movies. Let me know what you think of this movie in the comments below. I've got to give it's a solid 7 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw The Man with the Golden Gun. It is directed by Guy Hamilton, written by Richard Maybaum and Tom Mankiewicz. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie's premise is that there's a guy with a golden gun, and he has custom bullets, and it's up to James Bond, A, find out where the man with the golden gun is, who he is, and where he's getting these custom bullets. There's a lot of shots of James Bond chasing people and also people chasing James Bond. I think my favorite has to be when James Bond notices that this chick, she has the bullet that he's looking for, but it's in her belly button because it's the recoil. It hit the wall. It went through him completely. It went through her fiance, and it hit the wall, and it got crushed, and so she put it in her belly button, and now it's a token of good luck. Well, how James Bond gets it is that he's doing sexy stuff with her, kissing her, whatever, and is like kissing her navel, and then it's like about to kiss her navel, like with the belly button, and like put it in her mouth. And then a bunch of these guys come in and he swallows it. He swallows the bullet. I'm like, uh-oh, how is he gonna get that out? And the movie doesn't reveal how he got it out. I guess it's left to your imagination. I think he threw it up. What do you think, chat? How do you think James Bond got that bullet out of him? I also like how James Bond travels to Bangkok in part of his investigation, and he meets a guy. His name is High Fat. High Fat. And get this, he's not that chubby, but he's a little bit chubby. It's hilarious. High Fat, it's Bangkok. It's not English, but you say it in English and it's hilarious. It turns out that the guy with the golden gun, he has 3 nipples, and we know him the entire time. We get to show him talking about what's going on with James Bond and talking about his plans. His name is Scaramanga. He's the guy with 3 nipples, the man with the golden gun, and I really think that he developed a knack for pistols because of the 3rd nipple. He was probably ridiculed. I mean, he was a gun guy. He was doing guns. He was got good at guns at 10. He was professional. He was 15. He's really good. He's so good that he challenges James Bond to a duel at the end, and I think that's pretty cool. I like this part because it's like a high noon duel where they have to put their backs to each other and walk 20 paces, and then they go pow! And guess what? James Bond wins. Who knew that in this James Bond movie, James Bond would win? I like this movie because it's mostly a cat and mouse chase. We already know who done it. I think this is more of a how catch 'em in terms of the genre style, because we have James Bond, he's looking for this guy, he's looking for the bullet. Manufacturer, he goes to the manufacturer, he's looking for the person who shot this bullet, who bought this gun, and by the way, the gun, it's collapsible. It's just like a little gold piece, gold brick, but he takes the parts out and he makes it a gun, and then he goes pow. And I wonder, is that even possible? Could you do that? Is it possible to have a collapsible gun like that and all the
functions would still work. There's also a vat of liquid helium. Yeah, he's doing some experiments. He's like, well, I've got to keep this liquid helium really cold because I've got to dip people in liquid helium. I'm sure that's what he does. I'm sure that's what he's doing. Honestly, why else keep liquid helium? Oh, science experiments? Oh, wow, that's a front. There's a sign that says, keep this at absolute zero, and I was like, it's hilarious because absolute zero is not possible. He said, oh, this is negative 458 degrees Fahrenheit, and I was like, absolute zero is 459 degrees negative Fahrenheit. Get wrecked. That sign should have said, make sure that liquid helium is as cold as possible, as close to absolute zero as possible. There's this unit that James Bond is going for, and he steals it, and he did it. Yay! He figured out who the man with the golden gun is, what his motivation is, and now we thwart that. Good old James Bond, you did good. James Bond's body count is insane in this one. He makes out with 2 chicks. By the way, one of the chicks he's making out with, they're interrupted when another chick enters the room, right? And she's underneath the covers and it's dark, and she comes in and she's like, James Bond, you're here. And James Bond convinces her to sleep with him. And he's like, okay, I need some time to prep. And she's like, I need some time to prep. And so he takes the first chick, puts her in the closet. And then the second chick comes out and they start banging. And the first chick is in the closet. And then after all that's done, she's like asleep in the closet. Pulls her out, and she's like, what the heck? Come on. I didn't get to have sex with you, but she did? Ugh. And James Bond is just like, you'll have the chance again someday, sweetie. So he makes out with 2 chicks and has sex with 3 chicks. 5 chicks he's made out with, 3 chicks he's had sex with in this movie. Wow, his game is strong in this one. I can't believe it. This is a fun movie. I like the cat and mouse chase of it all. I feel like some parts of this movie gets a little slow, but then we got the action that happens pretty much a beat or a couple beats after I register, oh, this is getting a little boring, and then bam, something new happens. And I feel like the movie knew that I was going to think this is boring, so it did all the action stuff in that way. I think this movie is a golden time, and it's nice, it's decent, and I don't see any glaring issues with it. It's just a fun time. So I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 7 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint-Salad, and I saw The Spy Who Loved Me. It is directed by Lewis Gilbert, written by Christopher Wood and Richard Maybaum. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts a British and a Soviet Union submarine disappear. By the way, this is the 70s, so we're in the heat of the Cold War. I feel like the last movie was kind of about the Cold War too. I suspect that all of these James Bond movies coming up until the end of the Cold War are going to be about the Cold War in some way. Pretty much immediately this movie opens with James Bond having sex, or at least making out. It's implied that he had sex with this chick already. What I love about the beginning is that I thought that Triple X was the guy. I thought he was the dude. And then it's shown that it's the chick, and I was like, man, this guy kind of looks like James Bond. He looks a lot like James Bond, and I thought that he was James Bond until the next scene where it's shown that James Bond, actual James Bond, is making out with a chick and is having a great time about it. A blonde chick. He goes and gets the call, and they're like, yo, some subs were stolen. You gotta grab them. Grab the subs, please. And James Bond is like, all right, I guess I will grab the subs. Also, this chick's like, I guess I gotta grab the subs. And they eventually end up pairing up with each other to find out where the submarines are, even though they're on complete rival sides. You know, one for the Soviets and one for the British. And they have a rivalry. They seem to have a competition to get the specific device, and James Bond gets it, but then she ends up seducing her and then steals it from him, and I'm just like, man, women, right? This chick knows her value. She knows what her strengths and weaknesses are, and she exploits that against James Bond. And it seems like she doesn't want to be James Bond's side piece necessarily. She's just trying to get a mission done. but I like how eventually they have an affection for each other. There's also a guy, his name is Jaws, and he has metal teeth and he's pretty cool. I like how he just chomps his way through everything. If he needs bend metal, not only is he metal teeth, he's incredibly big and strong. So if he can't take a piece of metal and bend it, he'll just bend it with his teeth. Like the scene where he bends James Bond's gun with his teeth is pretty epic. I thought it was really cool. The reason why this movie is called The Spy Who Loved Me, James Bond killed the husband or lover. It's not confirmed whether they were married, but definitely lovers. I just find it hilarious because they're in like a fling together, and she's like, well, I'm gonna kill you, James Bond, after this mission is over. I'm like, okay, good luck with that. He's just gonna woo you not to murder him. Turns out the big bad honcho, he stole the nuclear devices so he could set a war to happen. He likes the marine life too much. He has an underground office where you can look at all the marine life, and I find that to be pretty neat. But he also has this elevator that has a hatch that opens from the bottom and dumps you into the water. And I like how when James Bond entered this office for the first time, he noticed that there's this hand that was not fully eaten. He's like, oh, something wacky is going on here. And it's demonstrated on several other people that they've fallen for the elevator. Haha, fallen. Get it? It's up to James Bond to stop these submarines from shooting the missiles that they have. They have nuclear missiles on the submarines, by the way, to destroy the world. There's a scene where James Bond has to like go into this really cool boat room where it's just her tied up and kept captive, and he has to go save her before this boat explodes. And Jaws is on that boat, and they're having a big old fight. Jaws is delaying James Bond, but James Bond is able to go aboard and be able to safely leave this boat before it explodes. And it explodes, by the way. And Jaws, I'm like, man, Jaws, that better have killed you. You look like a tough fellow, but could you survive a boat explosion? But also, we got the submarines. They're gonna shoot the missiles at each other and cause nuclear war, and James Bond has to stop that. And I like in the way that he does stop it. How they fix it is that they send the nukes to each submarine. And so with the nukes at the submarine, I guess most of the blast is contained by the water, but there's still a huge blast, and I wonder, how does the radiation work on this? I don't know. I guess the radiation is in the water now. Rip those fish. And then James Bond, he ends the movie by making out with the chick in the rescue pod. And I guess there's this bed in this rescue pod. I don't know why there would be. And also a bunch of champagne. I guess it's that guy's rescue pod or something. And they have a good old kissu session. His sex total, it's pretty astronomical. He has sex with the first chick, and then he bangs a couple other chicks. I think he has sex with in total 3, with the last chick being the person that he's been going after for the most of the movie, and then he has sex with her, and it's pretty cool. When they have sex, it's very satisfying because they're rivals throughout. And do I like this movie? It's a fun experience. I like how there's a little bit of complexity to the love dynamic because James Bond killed the lover. And I feel like the purpose of the movie, I mean, I like the action scenes, but I mostly like seeing the relationship between James Bond and that chick. And they're all rivals, and their governments hate each other, so it's just hilarious to me. So I gotta give this movie, I like it a lot. It's a solid 7.2 out of 10. I'm Salad, Min Salad, and I saw Moonraker. It is directed by Lewis Gilbert, written by Christopher Wood. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and we're following a Moonraker, which is on top of an airplane. I didn't know you could transport a Moonraker on top of a commercial jet. They get hijacked. I guess there are some dudes in the Moonraker. First of all, how did they get up there? Were they just sleeping
The movie doesn't really explain how they got up there. It's just, oh, they're in the Moonraker. So I guess it's presumed that they found a way to sneak up in there, I guess. And then they hijacked the Moonraker, which is pretty cool. And that plane that they're on, or that they were on, freaking combusts. And I'm like, dude, this is so brutal. So of course, James Bond is on the case. He has to look into this. What caused this commercial airliner to go down? The official story is that it went down due to mechanical errors, but someone actually hijacked it. Well, they don't know that yet, but I know because I watched the movie. By the way, Jaws is back. It seems like he's working for somebody else. Is he a freelance guy? Jaws survived an explosion last movie. What is gonna kill Jaws? The vacuum of space? Is that the only thing that could kill Jaws? I think we're gonna put that to the test in this movie. My hands are freezing. You can probably tell how cold it is. It's freaking snowing. James Bond meets an astronaut. She's very pretty and I'm cosplayed like her. She wears this at some point in the movie, but she's very smart and very capable. I like the cat and mouse game they have going on, and I realize that I say cat and mouse game a lot in these James Bond reviews, or at least the past few, because I really feel like it's James Bond chasing a lady, because that's much more interesting to him than just sleeping with a woman. I've said this before, and I still maintain that opinion. He goes to Venice and he rows the boat. It was pretty cool, but in Venice, he finds a lab that's producing a bunch of viruses, and that's no good. No viruses. And of course, he's like, well, who's the viruses going to? And he follows the trail all the way down to the space station. And honestly, the part that's between finding the lab and finding the space station, that middle part was kind of doling, what's the right word? Droning. It felt like a drone. I was like, okay, this is alright. I'm getting parts of the story, but I really feel like I know that James Bond is going to eventually find a space station because we saw the Moonraker. But how does he get there? That's what this movie is primarily about. How does James Bond find this guy? Because I feel like James Bond has a little bit of a whodunit and how catch him, because we get introduced to the villain a little bit, little pieces throughout the movie, and we get to know more of his organization and his motivations, right? And so it goes from a whodunit to a how catch him. I also like how the spy agency, at some point when it appears that James Bond made a mistake, they're like, just take a break. Just take a leave. And then we got James Bond, he's like, alright, I'm gonna go to Rio. But he's following somebody in Rio. And then he's in Rio, and when the organization finds out that he found somebody in Rio, they're like, alright, you're coming back on 2 weeks. You're just gonna be always working, aren't you, James Bond? That is the perfect employee for them, by the way. Oh my goodness. I guess you gotta have this level of dedication if you're in the spy game. You gotta be either all in or completely out. There's no middle ground whatsoever. He's exploring the Amazon desert. Jaws catches him, takes him to Drax, and Drax is like, yo, what are you doing, dude? And James Bond is just like, I'm looking around, I'm getting information. But he never says that, right? That's always what he's actually doing. But he has an air about him. It's very just aloof. He plays aloof. It's not that he is aloof. He's a very smart, clever man, but he's playing aloof. So these guys underestimate him, that they let their guard down. And so James Bond can have the upper hand and win. James Bond goes on the back of a car after he escapes. Car goes vroom into space station, and then car go down into space station, and now he's in space station, and now he sneaks onto Moonraker 6. What he does is he goes bow, bow to the astronauts there, and then he goes up, and it's pretty great. And also, I didn't mention, now I'm talking about astronauts, I really like the scene where James Bond is in that G-force machine, and he's like zoom, 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 and this stupid freaking woman, she's like, I'm gonna leave it unattended. You know, that's standard protocol around here. Bye-bye. And it allowed for somebody to sneak in and turn up the G-forces to a point where he's almost passed out. So yeah, he can definitely handle liftoff. Luckily, this woman with him is an astronaut, so they take over Moonraker. They gotta go onto the space station and disable the radar so the United States can be like, yo, what's up there? And so they go investigate, and then by the time that they're there, a bunch of by the way, Jaws is there. I guess Jaws snuck on too, but yeah, Jaws is there. It's a fun time seeing Jaws fight the chick in James Bond. We also got a freaking laser show going on outside of the space station. At this point, I'm like, whoa, this is way too jumping the gun. There's no laser technology. The only laser technology is huge. Are you saying since the last couple of movies, they took the big laser technology and made it like a gun shape? No, that's not how fast technology works. Okay, this is the 70s. We don't even have lasers now. We're in the freaking 2024s. Okay, almost 2025. We're a quarter way through the century right now of the 21st century, and we don't have lasers. Well, we do have those laser pointers, but I'm talking plasma laser weapons. We don't have that yet. If I'm wrong, leave a comment below. So everyone is going right, and then they find a shuttle to get off, and they leave everybody, including Jaws, to be exploded. But you know, I think Jaws can only be defeated by the vacuum of space, and that's what happens in this movie. Heck yeah, and then the whole space station explodes. But there's these two guys that these United States astronauts save, and I'm like, wait, it's exploding. How did you guys save them? Whatever, who cares? And then we have the astronaut chick and James Bond, and they go kiss you, and that's the end of the movie. I feel multiple ways about this movie. On one hand, it was kind of slow in the middle part, but the beginning part is an interesting way to set up a movie, and the end is balls to the wall crazy. But on the other hand, it's boring. I guess I put both of my points on one hand. That's not how it works. Oops, my bad. Anyway, I really like the space stuff. I'm not gonna lie. I like how they jumped the shark. They jumped the shark in Thunderball, but this jumped the atmosphere. Now we're in space. It's pretty epic, and then of course they had to have a freaking Star Wars reference, because this is 1977, this when Star Wars first came out. I don't know if it was coincidental or not, but that's what it reads to me as somebody in 2024 watching a 1977 film. James Bond has sex with 3 ladies, and by far the most interesting one to me is the astronaut, because she's a career woman. I like that. I like how she's very focused in her job. It doesn't seem like she's very emotional. There are other chicks who were so emotional and not at all helping out in this movie. I was like, bro, do something else other than the like, oh my goodness, I'm freaking out. No, freaking help, please. But that just seems to be some of these ladies' responses to danger. But luckily, James Bond is a great man, an excellent man, person that everyone should be aspiring to, including women. I like Roger Moore. I feel like he is aged more into his role, and I forgot to talk about Roger Moore in the last 2 movies reviews. Oops. Because honestly, I just feel like he's the true James Bond. He really embodies the character to the point where I'm not thinking about the actor anymore. It's the character, and the character that Roger Moore plays is a very dynamic one. There's a lot of depth to the character. A depth that Sean Connery didn't seem to achieve as well as Roger Moore has. What do you think of Moonraker? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know in the comments, and also hit that like and subscribe button. Share this video if you liked the videos. So I gotta give it, it's a solid, even though it's boring in the middle parts, it helps that it's so ridiculous and silly. And the premise is an interesting one. Oh yeah, by the way, the main villain guy is, instead of water from the last movie, he instead does space. But it's the same exact motivation. They both just want to be alone. Anyway, this movie, it's a 6 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw For Your Eyes Only. It is directed by John Glenn, written by Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and there's a ship that goes down, and this ship contains a very important system that controls missiles. And of course the British government's like, yo, man, who's on this coast nearby that we trust, hey, biologist man, could you go retrieve that? And they try to, and instead they get killed. Somebody was hired to kill these people and steal this information system from this boat that was sunk. It's called the ATAC, and it's very important. If the wrong hand has those missiles, then the entire world goes because these are very powerful missiles, and they're using the British technology, which means they got a really gnarly Navy force and a lot of missiles and a lot of weapons. I'm sure they have a ton of weapons. Of course, it's up to James Bond to figure out who did the stealing. So James Bond tails the hitman, and the hitman goes to a place where it has a nice little armed security place and catches James Bond. Then he escapes when an arrow makes a guy go it's fun. And you just have fun all the time of escaping. But we find out who hired the hitman. It's another guy. And so James Bond finds that guy, and of course people are trying to kill James Bond, and we got some pretty cool epic car scenes in this montage, and I feel like, oh wow, this is so much more straightforward than Moonraker, and it's much more ground to earth. I think at some point I was like, this is not at all sci-fi fantasy like Moonraker was. I feel like this is a return to the original James Bond. This is a love letter. Instead of Sean Connery, we're using Roger Moore, which, by the way, he just sits so well in the role. It fits like a glove. It's a very tight glove, and he fits in it well, and it's pretty great. I like Roger Moore as James Bond, and I want to see more Roger Moore. There's also this chick whose father and mother got killed. You remember the biologist from the beginning of the movie? Yeah, that was her dad. And her mom got killed too, so she's out for revenge. And she actually ends up saving James Bond. She's the one that did the arrowing, right? I was pretty cool. I was like, okay, cool. She's gonna bang James Bond. And I will say, even though James Bond finds other chicks to bang in the middle of this movie, he ends up banging her as a final conclusion, as a build-up. Their relationship gets growing and it builds up, and you got the tension is there and the chemistry starts growing, and then boom, at the end of the movie when they make out and have sex, it's very satisfying. James Bond finds out who this guy is working for, and I remember this dude's name because it's Columbo, and I like Columbo. Yeah, the 60s Columbo. Yeah, that series. I like it. And so it's like, oh my goodness, it's a Columbo. Okay, James Bond is gonna go assassinate a Columbo now, I guess. So he's gotta go find the attack. Is it called the attack? But the head honcho already knows. And he's asking this guy, hey, can I meet your boss? And this guy's like, oh yeah, let's have a talk. Ooh. And James Bond is pretty loose. He says his intentions. And so when James Bond goes up to the office, the boss man has the recording of James Bond. Yeah, that guy was recording. Oh my goodness. Which state are they in? They're not in states. So the recording laws apply here. I guess it's the 80s. I don't know. Cell phones weren't really a thing, so I don't even know if that was a law back then. Anyway, so of course we have James Bond in this office, and we got this guy. He's like, I'm gonna kill you. James Bond's like, alright, do you want to have a good time first? Let's drink some wine. And I'm like, classy. I guess you guys are just classy gentlemen. I like how James Bond is in the deep in the heart of the enemy, and he's gotta go get the attic. He's got to find a way to sneak off and find it. He does have feelings for that chick now, and she's kidnapped, and he has to go grab her. There is that. I remember her tied up. I was like, oh, that's hot. I like the parrot. The parrot's really cool. I like the parrot when it says things. The parrot's saying very specific information that James Bond is looking for, like a location, and it's not said at all when James Bond is there. Which makes me think, okay, so I'm thinking that the pet trainer for the parrot said right before, like right as the cameras were rolling or whatever, said the phrase, and then whenever the parrot said the address or the place where it's at, James Bond is like, okay, cool. That's when he would start his take. So I find that to be pretty cool. I like production. I'm very interested in the production. When I see the hot ladies and whenever I see James Bond making out with the hot ladies. I'm not so attentive to them making out. I'm more so like, how is this filmed? How far away is the camera? I feel like this movie is just so drenched with 80s energy. Oh yeah, the return of the 80s. That was 40 years ago. I was not born in the 80s. But I know the 80s aesthetic, and the 80s aesthetic is all over the place in this movie, which I like. And also the music is very 80s, very early 80s for sure. Oh, this guy stole the attic from James Bond. James Bond, I think you're a little too careless. This one guy has the attic though, which is cool. But luckily, James Bond is able to scale this wall. When I say wall, it's a cliff. This is a very tense scene. I'm watching this. I'm like, man, this is insane. Like, you got the one killer, he's like knocking off the little safety carabiner things. And so it's like he's about to fall to his death. And it's like, oh no, James Bond. But luckily, this guy, he has a rope attached to like something at the top. And James Bond is able to kill the guy. And he's able to climb to the top, and it was awesome. After they scaling this wall epically and get in the attic, then he goes down. Everybody's going down with him. Then there's this helicopter. The helicopter's like, yo, give it to me. And you know what James Bond's solution is? Instead of giving it to this guy who's been looking for it the entire time, he freaking chucks it. And then the guy just leaves. I'm like, okay, I guess you're good? Why did you leave? I thought you were gonna do something violent. The movie ends, and we're seeing the chick. Her name's Melina, even though the one where her parents got killed. Melina and Bond have a fun old time at the father's yacht, and I guess the father was loaded as a marine biologist, I guess. Maybe he's doing some money laundering, who knows? Anyway, that's how the movie ends, and I'm like, this is a really fun time. I enjoyed this movie. I like how it has the vibes of the first few James Bond movies. It's a return to form, and it doesn't jump the shark at all. It feels like I'm there pretty much the entire time, step by step by step. Of course, there's a problem that I've noticed throughout all of the James Bond movies so far, and this is definitely a big issue with all the big jump the shark ones, is I feel like there's a lot of location changes and not a lot to justify the location changes. Sure, there'll be a line or two saying, oh, you gotta go to this place now, but if you're not really paying attention, you're now wondering why they're in the Bahamas, or why they're in Greece, or why they're in Jamaica or something, whatever. It could be any location. So I feel like these James Bond movies, although they're really, really fun, they can be a little confusing, and they really load you with information. I like how Dr. No did it. I feel like that was pretty good, and Goldfinger was pretty well done, and then everything past that has just been like, oh, okay, cool. I understand the James Bond formula, and he's gonna change locations a lot, okay. And I feel like these are starting to get a little bit formulaic, although this one, not so much. But there is definitely a pattern there. James Bond has sex with 4 chicks in this movie. One of them ends up dying very quickly after he has sex with her. I feel sorry for that chick, but at least she doesn't have to live anymore and pay taxes and worry about dying because she's dead. Anyway, what do you think about this movie? I liked it. It was a fun time. It was a good return to form. Nothing could beat the original movies, in my opinion, though. But what do you think? Like, comment. You probably already subscribed, but do it again and share this video around. I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.6 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Octopussy. It is directed by John Glenn, written by George MacDonald Fraser, Richard Maybaum, and Michael G. Wilson. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. We're following a clown. He's been wounded, and he has an egg. A fake egg.
and he takes it directly to this British emissary's office and crashes through the window. There's an active party going on, and he just crashes in like a frickin' clown. It's up to James Bond to figure out who is selling the real egg at this auction. So he goes to the auction, and he's doing a little survey, and this egg, this real egg, the guy that's with James Bond is like, oh, it's not gonna go more than like 300,000 pounds. And there's this guy who's in a bidding war who is like, I'm gonna offer $400,000. James Bond is like, 425. And this guy's like, are you insane? And of course, the guy bids higher because he really needs it. And James Bond was testing if he needed it or not, and he definitely does. So James Bond goes and trails this person. What does he need it for? What does he need this egg for? I also like how this takes place in India. It's so chaotic. Oh my goodness, especially with the chase scenes. We got people in the streets about to get hit by cars. It's such a fun time. We also got James Bond is playing backgammon with this guy. This guy has some loaded dice. I like this exchange that James Bond has with this guy. This guy's like, you need to be really lucky in order to get the money that I have fronted on this table. Right, and James Bond is like, well, let me just use your dice. And then he rolls 2 6s. He's like, well, I guess I get the money now. And this guy is like, I want to send some of my men to kill him. And so, you know, then we get more chase scenes with James Bond, always being chased. Oh my goodness. There's also this chick that's with James Bond, and James Bond has the egg, and this chick's trying to get to the egg, and they have a sleep together, but then she sneaks out in the middle of the night and is like, oh, hey, I'm gonna steal the egg. And then James Bond wakes up and is like, what you doing there? And she's like, oh, nothing. And then she takes her scarf, ties it around the balcony, and just falls backwards and just starts blowing herself with the scarf, and then goes into his car. James Bond is like, all right, okay, cool. And then he gets knocked out. I'm like, this is awesome. James Bond has a tracking device within that egg, by the way, so he learns a lot of information about this guy's plans, why he needs this egg so freaking badly. There's also a subplot going on. There is this general who is really hungry for world expansion, I guess. Oh, there's a dog here. Hello, dog. Come on. Come on. Woo, hi. Hi. There we go. Hello.
3 hours later.
Ah, good. I'm gonna have to... Oh no, you're on the mic. He's a big lick. Big lick. Good boy. Alright, go play somewhere else. James Bond meets Octopussy. It's a chick. She runs a octopus cult, I guess? Yeah, and she loves this octopus that's in this tank of water. It's pretty cool. There's also like a whole circus plot. By the way, the circus plot is that they put in a bomb in the circus that is going on this Air Force base, and it's going to explode, but the idea is that this goes kablowy and everyone's like, oh my goodness, it's a bomb! And everyone on the border of the Soviet Union US line is going to be going to the bomb threat, and that leaves room for the Soviets to get them. So it's up to James Bond to stop this. I really like James Bond on a train track, in a car. It's pretty cool. Like, the tires are gone, so he just goes on a train track, and I thought that was pretty sweet. And he's going into the circus. There's a guy dressed up as a clown. It's like pretty scary, and also, oh gosh, clowns. They can be very, very scary. I'm not a big fan of clowns personally. They don't scare me, they just kind of unsettle me, I guess. And then James Bond turns himself into a clown, just like 009 turned himself into a clown and then died as a clown in the very beginning of the movie. And he does an infiltration and he stops the Bond, and it's pretty cool. I also like how Octopussy is against James Bond during the entire time until the very end. Big man, head honcho, aka Kamal Khan, he betrays her. And also, by the way, there's a nuclear warhead in that bomb. And so she helps him deactivate the bomb, which is pretty great. I like it. I like how she helps at the end. The final scene is pretty intense. Khan takes Octopussy as a hostage, and so they go into a plane, and James Bond goes in the plane. They attempt to take over the plane. They're all on the side of the plane. It's pretty freaking tense. And then I like how they have to eventually jump off of the plane in like parachutes. And then we got Khan who just dies, and then they're having a good old time. To celebrate, James Bond and Octopussy have some sex. And it's cool. I like it. I like this movie. I like the name. I like the octopus motif. And I like how this is pretty grounded. I would say this is probably the same amount of grounded as the last movie. This introduces some questions like, why the name Octopussy? James Bond only has sex with 2 women in this film. Kind of disappointing, knowing that his body count is a lot higher in the other films. I do like how it's satisfying that he has sex with Octopussy, especially since she's introduced as a villain, a femme fatale as you might call it. For the name being Octopussy, I was expecting it to be so glamorous, but other than it being set in India and having a lot of cool palaces and a lot of cool set places, it changes from India to like France and Greece and whatever. It just changes places all over the place. And so I like that it's nice and pretty, but plot-wise, okay, I guess. Oh wow, you're gonna get an egg. Why does this guy need an egg? Oh, because he's working with the Soviets. And this guy really wants to blow up the entire place with the Air Force base. Octopussy is such a strong title, and this is not such a strong movie. However, it is pretty enjoyable, and I like Roger Moore. He's really settled into the character. I don't see Roger Moore at all. I see James Bond, and he's also looking a little older, which I find to be more as distinguished. I like James Bond looking a little older. It shows that he has a lot of experience, and I like that. What do you think of Octopussy? I like the octopus. That was a cool guy. I want to see more octopus. There's not enough octopus in this Octopussy movie. So I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.3 out of 10. I'm Salad, Min Salad, and I saw A View to a Kill. It is directed by John Glenn, written by Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie involves horses. Oh yeah, baby. He goes to a horse track rink, James Bond does, and he has a little fun time looking at the horses race. And there's this one horse that runs pretty much all the time, and James Bond is like, what's up with that? Is that guy cheating? And it turns out that guy is cheating. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. He's putting some adrenaline pack booster things. I guess it's supposed to increase the adrenaline in the horse so the horse runs faster. But can you over-adrenaline a horse? Is that a thing? I'm sure it is. I mean, there's probably a reason why humans don't use adrenaline for everything, because, I mean, it's part of your fight and flight response, but is too much adrenaline a bad thing? Let me know in the comments below. I like seeing Roger Moore a little bit older. He definitely looks like he's aged a lot within the past few movies. Oh boy, and his performance, it is probably the most distinguished I've seen him, and it's very like subtle and professional the way that he acts, and I like it. It definitely feels reminiscent of the other performances that he's done, but this one is definitely by far the most aged one. Aged alcohol, whatever alcohol ages well and it gets better with age, that's what Roger Moore's performance is in this movie. James Bond looks into this man who keeps adrenalining his horses, and he looks into this guy, he's dealing with a big old plot. I mean, a huge plot. And before James Bond can find out more details, this guy, he's like, oh, you're an agent, you're not allowed to be here. I gotta send my men to kill you. And then he has to run away from them, and then has to go back and find out more information on this guy. But eventually it turns out that this guy wants to blow up the area next to the 2 faults, the San Andreas fault and another fault. I guess there's a couple of faults in that area. I've only known of the San Andreas fault, and there's also that San Andreas movie, which is, oh my god, it's not a good movie. It's just a disaster porn is how I described the San Andreas movie. But this guy wants to blow up the San Andreas fault and another fault. For what particular reason? I mean, he does buy an oil rigger's family business out of them, so I'm like, maybe he has some more nefarious plans. Of course, there's the use of microchips that's happening, and I'm thinking maybe he wants to get rid of Silicon Valley, so he has a monopoly on the silicone chip making industry, I guess. I mean, Silicon Valley refers to the area where
there's a bunch of technology, or at least it does now. This is the 80s. I don't know what the technology situation was like, but I'm sure it probably means there's a lot of silicone there for electronics, because you need silicone for electronics and also for other cooking stuffs too. Silicone's also good for, so I don't know if you make silicone or if it's a particular ingredient that you can only find in that area that makes silicone. Who knows? Let me know in the comments below. This guy, he has such a grudge with Silicon Valley that he wants to blow it up. And of course, it's up to James Bond to stop this. I like how in the end, there's a huge struggle for their lives. Well, the guy that Bond is going after and the guy, he's been adrenalining his horses. They have a big old fight at the very end. And I like how throughout this entire movie, they're kind of at odds with each other. There's always some circumstances which each person finds a way to escape from the clutches of the other person. More so in James Bond's case, where he has to find a way to escape. But I do like how he fights his name's Zoran, by the way. The guy who's been adrenalining his horses, his name's Zoran. He has a big old fight with James Bond, and we're in the air now, which is pretty hilarious because I like how the movie starts with horses, and I thought this movie was going to stay with horses, but this is a James Bond film, where a James Bond film feels the need to change location every 20 minutes. Oh my goodness. And I watch the transitions of the scenes go, and I'm like, yeah, I get it, they're in a car, they're driving places, and I feel like there should be more of a time to sit in where we're going. There should be more sitting time within the car. I mean, all the time that there is to sit into the car is always just spent with them getting shot at. And then once they're done getting shot at, they're driving, and then boom, they make it to a different place. I'm like, okay, cool, but I feel like this doesn't give me enough time to adjust mentally why I'm here, for what reason why I'm here. And you're gonna show me this information, you're gonna share it to me very quickly in a couple of lines of dialogue. Maybe this I'm just an idiot, right? Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe my attention span is too short. Maybe James Bond is too sophisticated. But I really feel like James Bond, the more and more as it goes on, it's an excuse to do different places, to go to different places in the world. I'm seeing all the stunts that are happening in this movie, including the last stunt, and I'm like, man, that's a pretty intense stunt. I can see where Tom Cruise gets the idea of Mission Impossible, because that's just now Tom Cruise having an excuse to do stunts and be an adrenaline junkie, and there's no problem in that. I'm just saying that's what you are, Tom Cruise. This is a fun movie. I would say the theme song, it's alright. It's nothing like Live and Let Die, which is the best theme song. Some people like this theme song, but I actually don't like it that much. I don't know. I feel like the first couple of theme songs of James Bond, and not only the theme songs, but also the intro credits. This one just seems a little bit less artistic than, say, Dr. No and From Russia with Love. That one was super cool. Like, those were awesome. Of course, it was simple women dancing in front of the projector, being naked and having the credits on their butts, right? This is just like a bunch of montage of like women, and then like, yeah, dancing women, colorful lights, whatever, and then like the transitions or whatever, I guess. I don't know, it's just not my favorite credit scene. It's not my favorite song. In this movie, I like the horses. I was really excited when I saw the horses, like, yeah, it's gonna be horse themed. It kind of shifts away from that, and then we got to deal with the San Andreas Fault and someone trying to explode it, and then James Bond stopping that and having to push the guy out of, well, throw some dynamite on this dude, because this guy was about to push some dynamite onto James Bond, but he switched it, and then that guy explodes, and then James Bond is good. And that's pretty much how the movie is. I really like seeing all the gadgets in James Bond movies, and especially this one. And, you know, the car chase scene is always fun. I feel like there's better car chase scenes in other James Bond movies. This one was just kind of whatever, in my opinion. Whenever I think of an iconic chase scene, I think of the one where he was in Vegas. That was awesome. What a great car chase scene. But this one, it's whatever, I guess. This movie, I don't know. I like this movie. I like how he sleeps with 4 women, and they're all so disposable, and I like it that way. What do you think of this movie, though? Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Do I get it? Do I understand? I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.4 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw The Living Daylights. It is directed by John Glenn, written by Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and we're following Timothy Dalton. By the way, Timothy Dalton, he's a Romeo type. Sean Connery is the misogynist, and we got Roger Moore. He's kind of a less misogynist, more spy, a little bit more low-key. He's got like a lot of confidence. So does Sean Connery. Distinguished confidence. Bond's mission is to protect Kozkov. He's defecting. There's this snipist who's trying to assassinate Kozkov, but luckily we got James Bond. He's like, I'm gonna shoot her, but shoots her gun, doesn't actually shoot her, and he's defecting. Hey, why are you defecting, James Bond? Because she's a lady? He has to explain this to the uppers. He's like, I have a plan, you guys. I want to see where this goes. Turns out she plays the cello. Turns out this cello player is Kozkov. I'm really bad at pronouncing things. Turns out they're dating. The cello player and him, they're dating. And it's pretty sweet because I get to see, first of all, there's so many faces to the relationship. We got the public facing relationship, you got a private facing relationship, but more importantly, his allegiances, they're not consistent. He's actually playing everybody. He's playing the British government by trying to find ways to fund an arms race with the Soviets so he can go against the Soviet Union and the United States. Bond sides with Kozkov's enemy to get against Kozkov because he's playing everybody. My favorite scene is when they're sliding down this hill, and in order to have a sled, first of all, she insists on getting her cello, which makes it so the bad guys can catch up to them, and then they have to sled down this hill full of snow using the case. And James Bond is holding the cello, and then they go, try like avoiding the cello, and there's a gunshot on the cello. I'm like, this is awesome. I love it. Oh, wow. Okay. I think I'm liking this movie a lot. Oh man, I gotta mention how cute this chick is. First of all, I like how this movie focuses on a Bond and one chick. One chick who is important to the plot of the movie. And I think I like this movie better than the other James Bonds, just in the fact that it just feels more impactful to me. There's like a sense of betrayal. This guy's been playing everyone, versus I feel like the other James Bond movies, they're just kind of discovering who's behind this plan, and then they share their evil plan and also what their motivation is, and it's usually whatever, who cares. But when Bond finds out, he goes from helping the guy to going against the guy, and it's the same person, but he gets more information, and he was very close, I mean very close, to duping the British government. Thank goodness that he didn't take the bullet at the girl before finding more information on her and this whole situation. I do like how the agency trusts James Bond, although they're very like, hey, what are you doing? We're going to trust you because we've trusted you in the past and it's helped us, but we just have to let you know that we're not okay with this idea, but we're gonna go along with it. It's kind of nice that James Bond doesn't have to report so much to the agency. Hello, dog. Come on. Nice. Hello, dog. You're a nice pit bull. You seem scared of people. I'm gonna be nice to you. All right, down. I also like the plot where he's selling opium, and he has to smuggle opium, and he has to get this opium on this plane. James Bond ends up on this plane, and he's about to set off a bomb, but then he gets on the plane, and so he has to get rid of the bomb before it blows up, and he's able to do it in the nick of time. And I thought it was a pretty epic scene. That was super tense. I really like this scene. It was super duper tense. I feel like the scenes in this are more tense than the last ones. I don't know, maybe just because there's more shots inserted than the other ones. Plus, you're not putting a bunch of different locations and actions within the same time frame. So I guess there's more time to make a more tense scene in this movie. I don't know, I just like this one more. I like Timothy Dalton. He's very, very, very Romeo. Oh my goodness, I just mentioned that before, but he has less of a misogynist air, but more of a sweet, kind-hearted air. What do you think of this movie, though? I don't know. It's fun. I like the action, and I like how conservative, compared to the other James Bond movies, of locations that they use in this one. It's more easy for me to follow. I gotta give this one, it's a solid 7.2 out of 10. I'm Mint Salad, and I saw License to Kill with the C instead of an S because it's British, not American. It is directed by John Glenn, written by Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie follows Bond trying to stop a big drug bust. That's pretty much the premise of the movie. However, the guy that they're trying to get, they capture him and then he escapes via the help of his friends. And so James Bond has to go to the guy's place, look around, have any reason to arrest him, which there is none. I really like the scene where James Bond is in disguise, knocking on that guy's door. He's like, yo, I got a shark to deliver. And he got the person who's answering the door, he's like, nobody's here. And then when James Bond's like, I have a shark to deliver, somebody in the back is like, yeah, bring him in. And then he says, oh, we don't have any sharks here. We got rid of all the sharks. You see that shark hunter? Don't mind it. That's for sale. James Bond, being as stubborn as he is, he's like, I'm going to stick back, look into what's going on here. And he finds sharks, a bunch of sharks, and a bunch of cocaine in the maggot stash, where he feeds all the fish maggots. And then I assume that he feeds the sharks humans, and he has the fish feeding, fattening up business as some sort of front, because his actual thing that he's doing is he's smuggling cocaine. He's selling drugs. That's a lot more of a profitable business than fish selling, fish fattening up eating. There's a point where there's a guard who's like, we got you, James Bond. And he has his hands in the maggots. He's like, can I take my hands out? The guy's like, sure. And he grabs a fistful of maggot, throws it in the guy's face, and pushes him into the maggots, and then closes the door. And like, is that airtight? Is that sealed? Oh no, that guy is just having to deal with a bunch of maggots. Ugh, that's gross. Here's something I've never seen in any other James Bond movie, where James Bond is very insistent on finishing this case. In previous films, the upper heads are like, okay, I guess, go ahead. Your job's on the line, but go ahead, right? This one, he's like, I don't want to go to the new assignment that you're assigning me, Istanbul. I ain't about that. No, no, no way. And so we got the head honcho, he's like, well, if you're not going to do this mission, I'm going to revoke your license to kill. And James Bond just runs off. He's a rogue guy now. Like, oh my goodness, James Bond's defecting? What? But of course, it's James Bond. He has really strong instincts, and I really think that the agency doesn't go harder after him because they know that when James Bond is so persistent on a case like this, he's going to get to the bottom of it, and he's going to figure out who is behind it and how to stop it. Head honcho's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. James Bond just left. There he goes, and he doesn't really do anything else to stop him. So we got James Bond, he's infiltrating, he's going into this laboratory, and he's very interested in what's going on there. Apparently, they have this whole scheme where they put gasoline and cocaine together. Okay, I mean, that part makes sense. Cocaine is water soluble, but also has gasoline in it. But here's the thing that kind of makes me go, what? How are you gonna get the gasoline out of the cocaine? There's already gasoline in the powdered form, and then you add gasoline to that. How are you going to remove gasoline and still keep the amount of gasoline that was in the powdered form? It's raining now. Umbrella time. Also, in theory, cocaine is flammable. It has gasoline, it has coca leaves, it has a bunch of chemicals added to it, it has people's feet. Did you know that's made with people's feet? We got this cocaine-fueled petrol, as it's British, but it's gas, whatever. And we have 4 tankers full of it. And James Bond is like, I'm gonna go after those guys. I'm gonna go after them in a plane, and I'm gonna jump on their trucks, and I'm gonna stop the shipment. Basically, their plan, the drug dealer's plan, is to sell this gas to a bunch of Asian drug dealers. But then, how are they going to extract the gasoline from the cocaine? There's already gasoline in cocaine, so you have to leave a little bit of it. Then you have to do some other stuff to it. It just seems
difficult. Honestly, I like the idea of smuggling cocaine in maggots more than gasoline because, first of all, which cop is going to put their hand in a bunch of maggots? Be real here. James Bond barely wants to do it. He looks physically disgusted while doing it. I really do like the truck part though. I think that has to be my favorite part of the movie, is when he's trying to stop these trucks from being delivered, and one by one they go down, and then you got the drug dealer man in charge of this whole operation. The fourth truck crashes, he comes out with a machete, he's like, I'm gonna kill you, James Bond. And of course James Bond pulls out a lighter, just catches him on fire, he fires to death. This movie's a really fun time. I like it. I also feel like this is a darker performance from Timothy Dalton. Last movie he was a big Romeo. In this one, there seems to be an air of rebelliousness. Of course, if he's going to be rebellious, it has to be for a good reason, which there always is with James Bond, and he has a strong intuition. James Bond's number count isn't that big in this movie, and it's also kind of sketch how many chicks he's had sex with in this movie, because the encounters that he's had with the two women, it doesn't show sex on screen, however, it does show intimacy. I think it's implied that they've had sex, but it's not explicitly shown. I really like Timothy Dalton's performance in the last two movies, and I know this is his last movie, R.I.P., but I like the darker tone of this movie. I like how Timothy Dalton portrays Bond in a darker light, and he just seems so determined. He does seem determined in the other movies, but I don't think he's ever been so determined that he just outright runs away from his head honchos. Here's another scene that I like from this movie. When you got the demonstration of the cocaine gas mixture being flammable, they decide to put it on fire, and then James Bond takes it and just throws it and puts everything on fire. And so their very expensive laboratory just goes down in flames and explodes. It's a fun time for me, but not a fun time for the person who invested money into that. I know some people don't like the darker tone, but I really do like the darker tone. And I feel like there's a satisfying conclusion at the end. James Bond gets his job back, and that's good because I want more James Bond in the future. What do you think of License to Kill? Do you think it should be spelled with an S or a C? I personally think it should be spelled with an S because I'm American, and it feels weird to spell it with a C. Let me know what you think of this movie in the comments below. I've got to give it, it's a solid 7.3 out of 10.
I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Golden Eye. It is directed by Martin Campbell, written by Jeffrey Kane and Bruce Fierstein. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and immediately I can tell that the technology has advanced. From the 60s filming to this is a 95 film. This movie came out 30 years ago. If you were born in 95, bam! You're just as old as this movie. This is also clearly an action movie, mostly focused on the action part versus the spy part, which immediately gives it a different vibe than the other James Bond movies. Something's different with the camera. I don't know, it just looks different. I'm thinking maybe there's some bokeh. I think there's some bokeh in the background, a little slight blur, that's what bokeh means. And also it's a wide angle lens, and I think the aspect ratio is different than the other movies. Plus there's a lot of movement in camera. I'm talking moving the camera back and forth in a 180 degree. The movie's plot starts with James Bond breaking into a Soviet place with a bunch of chemical weapons. He proceeds to destroy it and then goes away. This is set in the past, and then we get a few years later that we have a Golden Eye weapons program happening. More specifically, they don't know about this GoldenEye weapon until there's a helicopter that gets stolen and then taken to Russia. By the way, the Soviet Union has dissolved by now. Yay! I never lived through the Soviet Union. All I hear about are stories. Also, I was just thinking about the word Soviet Union, right? You got the United States. Technically, it's United States of America, but it is often referred to as the Union, or at least Americans call it that. But we got a Soviet Union. I guess the whole Cold War thing was between the ideals of capitalism and communism, and obviously capitalism wins because how are you going to make money money giving everyone the same amount of stuff. There's no motivation to make money or to produce labor to get more money. That's the purpose of capitalism. It incentivizes people to work harder so they get more in return. I'm actually surprised how long they lasted. MI6 detects some satellites up in the air, and so we got James Bond is on the case. And we got a new M, by the way. The last M, the last head honcho, he was a dude. This one is a chick. And immediately she is more intimidating than the last guy. I feel like the last guy kind of was okay with James Bond's antics. This one, she has James Bond more on a leash. I also feel like this movie involves the agency more than previous movies, which I like. There was also a blast produced by this weapon, GoldenEye. Very deadly blast. You gotta destroy it or else that blast is gonna be used to destroy a lot of cities, and that's no good. Wait, isn't there a treaty to not put stuff in the space because of weapons reasons? You can't put weapons in space? There's a treaty for this. There's people literally breaking that treaty. How are they not investigated by anyone? How did they get the ability to put GoldenEye up there without anyone noticing? I feel like you'd have to fill some forms out, send it to a bureaucracy, have the bureaucracy approve it, and then you can put a bunch of satellites in space. I feel like you'd have to lie about what it is in order to even put it in space in the first place, because if you're forthright or affronting, oh hey, this is a weapon, then nobody's gonna allow you to put it up there. But if you're like, oh yeah, it's just some satellite, then they're more likely to put it up there. So of course it's up to James Bond to try to get this helicopter. I like how he almost gets the helicopter, but then a bunch of these officers hold him back so the helicopter goes away. And so James Bond is like, dang it, well I actually have to get this helicopter this time. These guys, they didn't allow me to get the helicopter in the first place. Ah! I like how this movie has elements from other movies, like The Hidden Base, for example. Instead of it being in a crater, it's in a lake, and it has a satellite dish. And I wonder, how are you going to do this? How are you going to make an underground base in water? Do you make the base first and then dump a water on top of it, making a man-made lake? James Bond goes into this base. He gets captured, and there's some exposition thrown at him that this guy wants to destroy the economy of London. I feel like it'd be a better endeavor and more effective if you were to destroy the economy of the United States, because practically everything is based off of the dollar now. Not like actually, but unofficially actually, you know. A lot of people really value the dollar. What if the American dollar were to go down? Then what would happen to the economy? I feel like if you were to destroy the United States economy, it would be worse for the world. But this guy's like, I want to destroy London. I'm like, I get it because this is a British movie. I get it. But it'd be much more effective if you were to destroy the United States economy. Let me know if I'm wrong about economics, because I don't know anything about the economy except for what I observe. I also like the gadgets that he has. My favorite one is this pen. This pen that can explode. It's pretty cool. Don't you wish you had that type of pen whenever you needed it? I don't want to be at work today. I'm gonna take out my pen and throw it, and my whole place explodes. I don't have to do work anymore. I don't know, it just seems very convenient. But I do like how James Bond uses this to get out of trouble. He throws the pen at some chemicals, it goes phew, and then he's able to escape. We also got James Bond trying to take away control of the satellite, and he's successful. And we got some people trying to turn the satellite back on, while James Bond is trying to destroy it, trying to destroy this base. It's pretty freaking sweet, and I feel like this movie is more so focused on the action than the spy part. James Bond, he's kind of less trying to sneak around and more so just going it's just so many in this movie and so many stealing things. Oh boy, I like it. There's also a really tense scene where they're on an antenna and they're fighting on an antenna, and James Bond is about to fall off and this guy is about to kick him off, but somehow James Bond is able to take over the situation and that guy goes down into the antennae and dies. And I'm like, yes! GoldenEye is destroyed, and James Bond and the chick that he's been with pretty much the entirety of the movie, they're about to have a little kissu section. They're about to have a little bit of a kissu, and she's like, I don't feel alone. And he's like, there's nobody here for the 20 miles. And then a bunch of, oh my goodness, this is my favorite ending. We got a bunch of soldiers who were in leaves emerge and a helicopter, and it turns out to be like 50 people there. And I'm just thinking, oh boy, if James Bond had it his way, he would have banked that chick right then and there, and all of those Marine guys would have just heard it. It's just a really funny thought to me. James Bond flirts with a lot of chicks in this movie, but he only has sex with one chick in this movie, which is fun. I like it. It shows that he's more so focused on the objective and the mission more so than banging the chicks. Although, it's not for lack of trying. It's just that the mission just keeps interrupting any chances that he has. We also got Pierce Brosnan as the Bond, and I have to describe him as a mixture of Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton. I did read online that some people think he's a mix of Sean Connery and Roger Moore. No, he doesn't have the misogynist energy that Sean Connery has, but he definitely has the softness of the Timothy Dalton, and he has the focus and the flirtiness, not outright misogynist, but still kind of treating women as objects, but not as much as Sean Connery. He has those aspects of Roger Moore. So this is a combination of Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan. He brings the officialness of James Bond. James Bond in previous movies just feels like a cool guy. With this James Bond, he feels like a government agent. Do you know what I mean by that? He just feels like he's taken the job a lot more seriously than the other ones. The other depictions of Bond, it feels like he's using this job as an excuse to sleep with a lot of women. Pierce Brosnan feels like he's only concerned about the job, and whenever he sleeps with women, it's a plus. But he's not there to sleep with the women. I like GoldenEye a lot. What do you think of GoldenEye? I hear there's a video game that created a whole entire genre of video game. Let me know if you like this movie, if you like the video game, and what do you think of Pierce Brosnan in the comments below. I gotta give it 7.5 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Tomorrow Never Dies. It is directed by Roger Spitzelwood, written by Bruce Fierstein. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. You know Tomorrow Never Dies because it's a human concept about tomorrow, but tomorrow never happens. It's only today, all the time. That's why tomorrow never dies. But also, I might die in this weather because it's thundering. This movie starts, and we're following James Bond. He's on this ship, aircraft thing. I don't know what it's called specifically, but he's on it, he's trying to keep control, and then one of the higher-ups of M, who is a higher-up of James Bond, says, hey, you gotta destroy it. And M's like, no, I don't want to. But they're like, you gotta destroy it. And so they do. I gotta admit, this movie's plot is a little wonky for me. However, the Bond girl, she's such a badass. I love her. She can fight on her own. The other Bond girls can't really do that, but this one can. And that's why I'm like, yeah, she's the ultimate Bond girl in my eyes, because she has the same fighting power. Well, he's a man. He has more fighting power than her. But she knows martial arts, and she can use her kickiness to the ultimate degree, and I like it. I like the kickiness factor. The kickiness factor in this movie needs to be more, but there is a decent amount compared to the other James Bond movies where there isn't that much. This movie, we're dealing with GPS. Yes, GPS exists. This is 1997. I think 1997 was when the internet was not getting popular, but it existed. And of course, the GPS also existed. And of course, it was used for military purposes before consumer use, as are most things. But in this one, they're sinking ships. They're sinking Chinese ships, and James Bond is here to figure out what's going on with this GPS guy. What's up with this dude? Why does he want to use GPS as a weapon? So yeah, this one mostly consists of them sinking ships. I gotta admit, this plot is a little wonky, but I do like the action in this one. There's a lot of action, especially with the kickiness factor being so high. I will say this is kind of a downgrade from the coolness of GoldenEye and the plot making a lot of sense in GoldenEye. That was cool. And I feel like in GoldenEye, I didn't mention it slash review, but it's more evenly paced than this one. And this one just feels like a traditional James Bond film where it's an excuse to just go to other countries. More ships go down. More missiles go and hit the ships that go down. And it's up to James Bond to figure out what's happening. Well, there's this guy who's behind it all. He's the guy who's making all of the ships go kablowy, and he wants to destroy the Chinese government. I don't know why James Bond is particularly interested in this, other than that his higher-ups are like, yeah, you gotta keep the Chinese around because they make all of our products or something. That must be their reasoning. This guy wants to destroy the Chinese government? I mean, he's a Chinese general, so I don't know. I feel like he has more experience with China than anyone in this movie does. Why is nobody ever taking that guy's side? They're all like, don't destroy Chinese ships.
And I'm like, why not, man? This guy has a vision. I feel like this one is just an excuse for James Bond to go to this guy and be like, hey, don't explode that city. Don't go explode Beijing. And this guy's like, I want to explode Beijing. And so James Bond has to go on that guy's stealth ship and deactivate it and explode the ship and kill that guy. And that's pretty much this movie. Other than the Bond girl, this movie is kind of forgettable. Not gonna lie, I don't like this movie that much. I feel like even though it has more action, and I feel like the James Bond movies starting from GoldenEye are mostly focused on the action part and not so much the spy part, this one has a little bit more spy stuff going on and some action. And honestly, I wish I could just see more action. None of the action scenes in this movie really stood out to me like the previous James Bonds. And is this leaking? I hope there's no leak in here. Oh no, there is. Oh no. Yikes. This James Bond girl is the best Bond girl in my opinion. What do you think of Tomorrow Never Dies? I wish I had more to say about this movie, but I don't. I just don't like it that much. I honestly want to see more James Bond movies. Wow, cool title, Tomorrow Never Dies. Oh wow, not as cool as Dr. No and From Russia with Love in my opinion. What do you think of this movie? I'm sure I skipped some parts because this movie is not very memorable for me. It kind of just blends all together. There's not any specific scene that I can point and be like, oh yeah, this is from Tomorrow Never Dies. Because it just feels like the other Bond movies. Let me know what you think of the movie in the comments below. I've got to give it, it's a 5.9 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I Saw the World Is Not Enough. It is directed by Michael Apted, written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade, and Bruce Fierstein. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts in a billionaire gets It's up to Bond to protect his daughter, Elektra. It's spelled the same as Elektra, the Marvel's Elektra. Immediately I was like, wow. This is pretty cool. There's a mission at the beginning of the movie where Bond has a bunch of money and he's supposed to give it to the king guy, but then he dies. And so he's stuck with the money. He takes it back to MI6 and it turns out it explodes. Explosive money. So Bond's like, what's going on? Who is exploding our money? Elektra's overseeing an oil pipeline which was controlled by her father, and Bond is there. What's interesting about the relationship between Elektra and Bond, Elektra is no nonsense. She knows what James Bond is up to. She won't let him seduce her whatsoever. And this version of Bond, I feel like compared to the last movie, he's more flirty, but he is also very adamant about the mission, but he doesn't hesitate to flirt. He's like going behind Elektra and be like, oh, I like your figure, just like touching her. And this would not be allowed now. What guy can just go behind you and just start touching you and fondling you? He goes to a casino to try to figure out who are the people attacking Elektra. Elektra is there and she makes a really high bid on this game. I don't know if it's poker, backgammon. I don't know any other card games other than poker and blackjack that would appear in a casino. She puts $1 million down. Bam! Just one bid of $1 million. Just casual. And she loses it and she's like, I don't care. And I guess if you're the daughter of a billionaire, I mean, that's just one of those hundreds of millions that you just lost. You have 999 other millions to lose. I like how Bond becomes suspicious of her. At this point in the movie, I'm also suspicious because she's sus. Like, her behavior is super suspicious. I noticed her talking to some guys that James Bond doesn't know, and I'm like, why does she have any affiliation with those guys? Who are those dudes? We also get the introduction of Dr. Christmas Jones. Wait, why is her name Christmas? Is that a nickname that people gave her? Is that a nickname that she gave herself? But anyway, at this point in the movie, James Bond, not in the casino, but he sneaks in as like a scientist and meets her and starts consulting her about stuff. And then he eventually reveals his true identity to her. It's necessary for her to be sticking with Bond. I like her. She's really cute. I also like how much information she knows. She's a big brain. She has a big brain on her noggin, and I like that. I like how more and more James Bond chicks are starting to have brains. The earlier James Bond chicks didn't really have brains. They were just all body and all beauty or whatever, all curves. But this one, her curviness is in the curviness of the folds in her brain. Eventually, James Bond finds out that it was actually Elektra who killed her father. because she was upset that her father wouldn't pay the ransom money, but she staged the kidnapping. So you staged the kidnapping and to get money out of your father, and then when you were upset that your father didn't pay money to get you back, you had him killed. And you wanted control of the oil for what reason? You don't know anything about oil, lady. All you're there is a spoiled woman who is a daughter of a billionaire. You know nothing about business. She's like, I'm gonna put the oil over there instead of where it was going because I'm gonna spite my father. I'm like, have you ever considered why your father's putting the oil there and not where you're putting it? Freaking women. And on top of that, she kidnaps M because M told her father not to pay the ransom. Wow, this is the thing she gets. M knew something was fishy about this entire situation, and so she's like, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We do not pay their ransom money. Which is incredibly smart, by the way. There's a reason that M is above everyone in that agency. It's because she has a big brain on her head. Don't negotiate with terrorists. And this is what she gets. She finds out that the daughter of the person killed was the one who killed the guy. Oh my goodness. And I like her ingenuity. And I like her just chilling in a prison cell with a clock on a stool. And I'm trying to grab the clock and it falls. We got Elektra. She's like, it's time to die. And I'm like, can I see that clock? Elektra brings the clock. And then she's able to take a tracking chip that she had, that she stole, connect it to a battery, and turn on the tracking so the people at MI6 know where she's at, know where to find Elektra, and get Elektra because I hate her. She's spiteful. She's like, my dad didn't love me enough. No, he was probably gonna find another way to get you. I am infuriated by Elektra in this movie, especially because she poses as so nice at the beginning. She poses like she cares about her father, and then it turns out that she murdered her father. I like the scene where we have the guy. He's in the caviar. I didn't know caviar was a pool of blackish water. I didn't know that's how caviar was made. I thought you extracted caviar from live fish, live pregnant fish, and then put it in some sort of container or something. I guess it's this container that he's been pushed in. He's trying not to give James Bond any information, but James Bond's like, we're just gonna leave you here to drown in your own caviar. He's like, fine, I'll give you information. It also turns out that she stole some plutonium so she could use it to blow up instantable. How's it pronounced? I've never been to Turkey. I don't know. But anyway, she's like, I'm gonna blow it up. I'm like, why? Who cares? Why are you doing this, lady? I really don't understand this lady's motivations. She just seems like she's bitter at her dad, but her dad protected her, and she's not thankful about that at all, and I don't understand why she did this to her dad. I just think she's jealous. I just think she's spoiled. I just think she has a big ego. I just think she thinks she's better than everybody because her dad is a millionaire and she's being proven wrong, and that makes me happy. Yeah. The caviar man's sacrifice went to a good cause, though. He takes the cane gun and pews Elektra and kills her. I'm like, yes, that's what you get, you freaking spoiled lady. Almost nobody has a billionaire dad. So I was like, ha 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 ha, this is awesome. I'm so satisfied. You know, I'm less mad about her death than I am about the dad's death. The dad, I don't know, he's probably evil or something, but his daughter is pure evil. It just reeks of jealousy. It reeks of so many woman emotions. Oh man, no business sense whatsoever. I also like how James Bond and Dr. Christmas Jones, they're going into this oil pipe, and then there's this bomb that's in the oil pipe, and they're sent to deactivate it, and then it explodes, but luckily they're not in that part of the tunnel. When it explodes, Elektra's like, oh, they're dead. And then she just starts treating everyone terribly because she thinks that James Bond is dead, but no, he's not, and I like that. This review is definitely out of order in the order of events, but I told you what I liked about this movie. What do you like about this movie? I hate Elektra, and I'm glad she's dead. I like how James Bond has a kissy moment with Dr. Jones. She seems like a very nice lady. I like how James Bond sleeps with 3 ladies in this film, including Elektra. James Bond was feeling all over Elektra because he sensed that she wanted to have sex with him, but it's very presumptuous of James Bond to be doing that. Speaking of women, I really like the opening title sequence, not the song. I still haven't encountered a song where I'm like, oh, this is cool, I like the song. It matches what I like about Live and Let Die. I have not encountered a song like that since then, but I do like the opening sequence. It definitely is using computer stuff. The women, computer generated. But it looks pretty cool and I like it. I didn't notice any CGI in this film. I'm sure there was some. What do you think of this movie? Is the world not enough for you? It certainly is not enough for Elektra. She has billions, billions, billions of dollars to her access, and the world is not enough for her. She gets yeeted out of existence because she's so entitled, and if the billions that she has access to is not enough, she shouldn't be alive, which she's not. And that makes me happy. So I gotta give this movie the plot. It's fun. It's a little bit more straightforward. They do go to a lot of places, and I feel like with the James Bond films, I've said this in previous James Bond film reviews, but I feel like James Bond films have a problem with the in-between of locations. Like it'll show, oh, we're in Istanbul now, we're in this place now, we're in this place now, but there's not really a lot of transition in between. It's just kind of like, oh, we're here now, okay, I guess we're here, and then they change locations again. Car scene that goes and gets shot out, and then he goes to a different location, and then the same pattern again. Car scene, he gets shot out, and then different location, or variation of car scene being like different types of vehicles, but it's still the same structure. And for that, I gotta give this film, it's a solid 6.7 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Die Another Day. It is directed by Lee Tamahori, written by Robert Royd and Neil Purvis. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts with we're following James Bond. He's in North Korea. He's trying to escape, and oh boy, he has a narrow escape, but he gets captured by the North Koreans, and then he suffers for 14 months in prison until he gets traded out. First of all, MI6. They left James Bond in there for 14 months? Why? I'm guessing that the North Koreans wouldn't give over James Bond unless they gave somebody else over, and they actually do give somebody else over. He's not a good guy, he's kind of a murderer, he's doing a lot of espionage, he's not a good dude, you know, and he's from North Korea. And now he's loose. So it's up to James Bond to find out where this guy is going and try to stop him. There's also these diamonds that are found, and there's this dude who found a bunch of diamonds in Iceland, got really rich, and has invited James Bond to his ice palace in Iceland. Isn't there greenery in Iceland? I thought Iceland and Greenland was like a Viking trick. Oh, we're gonna make sure people go to Greenland, but there's a bunch of ice there. Ha 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 ha, you know, stuff like that. But also it's interesting. As soon as James Bond gets out of the 14 months of torture that he had to endure, then we got M being like, oh yeah, we revoked your 007 status. Now you're just 7 instead of 007. You're just 7. And he's like, why? And she's like, oh, well, we thought you were sharing secrets. And James Bond's like, I was not. I'm offended that you would even think that. And of course, it takes a little bit of convincing, but he gets the 00 back in his 7 name. Instead of being 7, he's now 007 again. So of course, James Bond, being invited to that ice palace in Iceland, he's like, well, I'm just gonna investigate what's here. How impractical is an ice palace? It would just melt. I feel like even the explanation in the movie is kind of whack. But we got a temperature setting that makes it so the ice stays cold while it's warm for the people. I'm like, that is impossible. That's literally impossible. How you doing this? But of course, it's happening. There's a bunch of people without like jackets over. They're like having bare skin, which suggests that it's warm inside this ice palace, and somehow it's not melting. And of course, we got the guy who got really rich off of those diamonds. He has this machine, this weapon in space. How did they get it up in space? Isn't there a treaty? There's like a no space weapons treaty happening. Like, actually, how did this guy pass that? The way he pitches it to his investors is like, oh, this is the way that we can make agriculture great again, okay? We gotta make sure that we heat up the earth more? Come on. This guy's plan is stupid. It is dumb, It doesn't make any sense, but of course he has this laser weapon that takes the sun, and he can do it in a concentrated force like a weapon, or have it kind of just be more bright everywhere and less concentrated. And all of these rich investors like, yeah, this is awesome. And I'm like, bro, this is a weapon. If you guys are so concerned about global warming, why are you melting the ice caps with this machine? Oh, you want to make a greenhouse effect? Go ahead, I guess. Flood everything you want. That's what you want. It seems like this guy did not think about the unintended consequences of this machine. I think he mostly just wanted it so he could have a laser beam using the sun's energy just to use, you know? And the agriculture thing is just a front, but it's a terrible front. I think through it and be like, this sucks. Why'd you make this? There must be some other reason why you made this. And James Bond thinks this too. He also meets this chick. She's cute. She turns out to be from the NSA, and she's in this ice palace, and this guy uses his weapon to melt the ice palace and make it so she almost drowns, but James Bond's able to save her, and then he goes out of Dodge. He just goes. Saves this woman's life, and he's like, okay, well, how do I stop this freaking machine that's happening? There's a laser, a space sun laser happening, and I need it to not exist anymore. Turns out he wants to get rid of that zone in between North and South Korea so North Korea can invade South Korea. And I'm like, why? They established that zone themselves. Why do you want to get rid of it? By the way, North Korea is not going to win. All of their soldiers are malnourished. Okay, are you serious? You think the North Koreans are gonna win? I don't think so. He's able to kill the guy, and he's able to destroy the weapon, and that's pretty much the movie. I feel like the diamond thing was only mentioned to show how this guy got a bunch of money. It just kind of seems placed in there. The very end of this movie, we got James Bond, he's going down this snow thing, and it looks so CGI. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not practical anymore. I can see the blue screen, I can see the computer graphics, this is 2002. It just looks dated. The graphics is very noticeable in this one. I really do like the glitchy effects that the invisible car has. I thought that was pretty cool. There's probably like 3 minutes straight of just CGI. I'm like, ugh, this is taking me out of the movie. I really like the title, Die Another Day, and I like the song, Die Another Day. I don't know, I think I just have a soft spot for early 2000s stuff. That's pretty cool. I like Linkin Park and early 2000s hip-hop, so it kind of, I like the song. I like the song for that reason. Early 2000s, sweet spot in music. James Bond only sleeps with 2 women in this movie. Jinx, that's the chick that he's with pretty much the entire time, the NSA agent. She's adorable. I love her, and she can fend for herself. She's not one of those damsel in distress James Bonds. She has a brain. I feel like I said this in the previous James Bond movie, that a lot of the women in more modern James Bond films are starting to have brains versus the earlier James Bond films. They have no brains. I watched this movie, I was like, huh? Wait, how does that make sense? I don't understand the through line logic here. It's pretty cool. The title's rad, but the plot itself, I'm like, it's whatever. It was a fun thing to watch. If you turn your brain off, this is a fun movie. But if you leave your brain on, you start thinking about the plot holes in this movie. And I feel like the plot holes are more evident in this movie than the other James Bond movies. I don't really have much else to say about this film. What's your favorite part about Die Another Day? What did I leave out? I'm sure I did leave out a bunch of stuff. I felt like the details were honestly kind of muddy, and I just said the most important parts of this film. The plot's whatever, but because I enjoyed it so much, I think I'd give it a 6 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Casino Royale. It is directed by Martin Campbell, written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade, and Paul Haggis. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and we're following James Bond and look into the past in black and white as to how he earns his 00 position. And then after this cold open, it starts with the little shooty thing that each James Bond does at the beginning. So I think this is the only one that breaks convention. And then after that point, it's in color and it takes place in the modern day. What's interesting about James Bond, immediately I'm like, this looks much different than the other James Bonds. He acts in a colder, harder way
than the other ones, but he looks different, and because of how he looks, I just can't get into the character of James Bond as much. Or at least at the very beginning, it's very noticeable. I'm like, oh, this is weird. Am I going to get used to it? And the answer is yes. This movie is Bond following this guy, the heels of this guy who makes bombs, and he's seducing his wife, and he actually is successful at doing so. And this guy that James Bond is pursuing, he's looking to make a bunch of money because he's taking whatever investment he's been getting and putting it in the stock market and gambling it away. And he has lost a lot of money, so he needs to have this really intense game of Texas Hold'em, which is honestly the best part of the movie, is just watching James Bond and this guy play Texas Hold'em, and they have a lot of money. I'm talking millions upon millions of dollars at stake. What I like about this movie is its pacing. It's very easy for me to follow the pacing and also the emotional beats of what's going on, and it seems like everything is progressing into each other, and it makes a lot of sense. I also like seeing that during the middle of the poker game, James Bond, he has his classic drink that I wanted to make, but since it's a Sunday, all the liquor stores are closed. RIP Kentucky, I live in a dry county. Isn't it ridiculous that some places you can't buy alcohol on Sundays? It's actually kind of annoying. But anyways, so he has his classic drink, but the classic line from the previous movies is he wants a vodka martini shaken not stirred. But this one, it's like parts of this and parts of this and the parts of this, plus a little bit of lemon peel shaken until it's really ice cold. And it's pretty intense. I was reading up on it, and it seems like this is a very intense drink. This is essentially a double drink. I'm like, oh boy, he has one drink, but the drink that he does is intense and is full of alcohol. It shows his character, major alcoholic, but is a high-functioning alcoholic. Of course, he's flirting with this guy's wife, and he has this nice little poker game that is the most tense thing I've ever seen. James Bond loses it all the first time, and then another guy who's like, oh, I'm on this guy's butt too, okay, I'm here too. He gives him some chips, and then James Bond ends up winning all, and I mean all, in like this awesome bet, right, where he gets like a straight flush, whereas this guy has like all these high level cards, and he's like, oh, I'm putting it all in. And then James Bond wins so many millions of dollars. I'm talking $110 million. It's a lot of money. And then this guy, he's so angry that he kidnaps James Bond and just starts torturing him. He's like, give me the money. And he's like, no, I don't want to give the money. And then there's also this chick that he's with. It's different than the wife of the guy. This chick, she seems to be really nice, but this movie teaches me a very valuable lesson, is to never trust them hoes, because this chick, although she appears to be in love with James Bond, and James Bond actually falls in love with her, which, by the way, the actual James Bonds, they wouldn't be doing this. I mean, you got On Her Majesty's Secret Service where his wife dies suddenly after she's introduced suddenly, so that didn't really have much of an emotional impact to me. I think it was just a way to be like, oh, well, now he hates women because his wife died. But this one, he just loves this woman again, and then she actually ends up betraying him. She's stealing the money out of his bank account, even though it's supposed to go towards MI6. And so he's trying to go back to the money, and she's like, well, I betrayed you, I don't want to live anymore, and she ends up drowning. And I'm like, wow, that's sad. I think her name was Vesper or something, and so she's referenced throughout the other movies, and I'm like, I like how she's referenced because this movie really paints an emotional connection unlike the other movies. Even On Her Majesty's Secret Service didn't do a good job like this movie in establishing a woman that James Bond falls in love with, and then she eventually betrays him, and then she's like, well, I can't trust any of these hoes anymore. And honestly, I like how soft of language she speaks about her towards the beginning of the movie, and then by the end, when we have like him escaping, he barely escapes with all the water, and then she drowns, and then the guy gets away and he's not able to get the guy. He talks about her in a very harsh tone, says like, oh, that bitch, right? Never used that word at all before this point. So it's very stark contrast. I mean, she was threatened, her life was threatened, so she had to become a double agent. But it's still kind of terrifying and sad and shocking that somebody you love would betray you like that. And that's what has spawned James Bond's trust issues, is because of this lady right over here. And then it just ends with James Bond just dropping her necklace and moving on. So this movie definitely hits the most emotionally for me. In terms of a standalone film, this is by far the best James Bond. However, in terms of placing it with the other James Bond films, it's kind of weird because he acts a lot different than the last James Bond movie, which is Die Another Day. In this one, it seems like he's a little bit more naive, a little bit less experienced. So it's weird. It's like, why is he acting like he has no experience with this? Why is he acting so surprised that all the hoes are betraying him? Like, even though the tension of this film is top tier, and I actually found myself yelling at the TV screen like, yes, I love Texas Hold'em. And watching this movie, I was like, man, I love Texas Hold'em. I'm not really much of a gambler. I'd play Texas Hold'em with freaking candy. I just like the card game itself. I don't even need to have money attached to it. I'll just play Texas Hold'em without money. That's how much I love the game. So I was watching it and I was like, this is awesome. I'm such a big fan. This is the most I've really had my eyes glued to the screen when it comes to a James Bond film. But in placement with the other ones, it's kind of weird. I don't know how to rate it for that reason. I mean, as a standalone film, it's great. As a James Bond film, there's some issues with it, like I mentioned. Surprisingly, James Bond only sleeps with one woman in this film. It seems like he's more interested in one lady throughout the film, more so than diverting his attention and going for many different ladies like a classic Sean Connery James Bond would do. But I do like the depthness that is created in this film. What do you think of Casino Royale? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Where would you place it on your James Bond favorite movie list? I gotta give it, Daniel Craig did a good job. I gotta give it, it's an 8 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Quantum of Solace. It is directed by Mark Foster, written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade, and Paul Haggis. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and we have Bond. He has a certain white and he's taking him to M, and then he takes him to M and they're questioning him. What's interesting is they question him and he's like, oh yeah, by the way, we have everybody in everywhere, including here. And then a guy just comes, he's in the room. He's working with MI6, presumably. He's like a bodyguard and he starts shooting. And of course, Bond goes and chases him, follows him, and then that guy gets shot by Bond because Bond really likes to shoot people instead of trying to capture them. And this seems to be a reoccurring theme in this movie, is M is very mad at Bond for keep trying to save them, but he instead shoots them. She's trying to get information. We also got Quantum is happening. And there's this guy who wants a big chunk of land in Bolivia, and he just wants that land. He's okay with everything else happening as long as he has that land. And I guess he's been damming the water. He's trying to create a monopoly, a water monopoly. He's supposed to sell the water. The thing with monopolies, though, something that I've never seen any person strive for a monopoly ever consider, is that once you have a monopoly, the pressure to sustain that monopoly is so great that then the monopoly falls. So why create a monopoly? Do people never think long-term about all their plans in movies? Because it seems like they never do. Something I've noticed about the editing in this, especially with the fight scenes, there's a lot of cuts. I mean, a cut not even every 3 seconds, maybe every 1.5 seconds there's a cut, and it just looks very busy. I do like the location. It's pretty cool. I like the sandiness. I like Italy. I've never been to Italy. It looks cool. I like the different locations. I feel like in this one, the transitions between different locations, although they're prettier, in my opinion, because there's more colorful and the cinematography just looks cooler, in my opinion, it still struggles with the same issue of taking two places and transitioning them together. I feel like this movie just feels like, oh, I guess we're just gonna have a title card say we're in London now, or in Italy now, or we're in the middle of the desert now, we're in Bolivia now. I personally wish there was a little bit more transition. Of course, MI6 is very interested to see why this guy is so interested in this land. Some people suspect that it's due to oil, but this guy, even knowing that there might not be oil, still takes the land. So I'm thinking maybe there's something else there. He's even kind of cagey about the deal. He's like, whatever I find there is mine. I'm like, you're expecting something there that the other people don't expect to be there. What's your plan ultimately? There's also people begging Bond to forgive Vesper. I'm like, okay, cool, I guess. I mean, you bring up Vesper, you don't really bring them up as like a person shown on screen. I feel like it's mostly shown as like a reference to the other movies. Oh, hey, this happened, well, we gotta forgive them. It's like, no, why are you putting in plots from another movie into this movie? I kind of personally want James Bond films to be very standalone. However, it seems like the James Bond movies, as they progress more into more modern times, they're becoming more sequential, more so than just standalone films you can just watch at any time. I do like Daniel Craig. He looks so different than the other James Bonds. At least the other James Bond actors, they were approximations of what they looked like. Although they acted a little bit differently, I feel like Daniel Craig, he acts the most Bondly. The weakness the women thing, that is exaggerated in Daniel Craig's performance of Bond. It seems like any woman that he encounters, he's looking at them, he's ogling them. He's not making misogynist remarks like the other James Bonds have. It seems like James Bond regards women more so as prizes, and to have sex with them is, I want an ultimate prize, versus the other James Bonds. They looked at women as objects, but they weren't so put on a pedestal like James Bond, this version of James Bond does. Compared to the other James Bonds, Daniel Craig is a little bit of a simp type, is how I'd best describe him. We also got a chick who's involved. She eventually comes on to assist James Bond, and she's doing this for vengeance, her own personal vengeance. These guys, they mess with her family, cause their family to break apart and die, and not good. No good things happened. So she's like, I'm gonna get him. So basically, it's her plus James Bond. They stop this guy from taking all this land in Bolivia and having a water monopoly, so he dies, but in the coolest way possible. James Bond takes this guy, puts him in the middle of the desert, gives him some motor oil, and then he goes, I bet it'll take 20 miles before you consider drinking that. And then he just leaves. He just lets that guy just walk in the middle of the desert. That's wild. And then he dies. And then we have M's there. I feel like in this film, there's a lot more involvement of MI6 than there has been in previous James Bond films. There's more of James Bond reporting back. And then we also have, in this one, since James Bond is so insistent on following this guy, and M's like, hey, bring back James Bond. James Bond does not come back. She has to turn off all of his access to money, access to anything, passports, whatever. She turns all of that off. And there's this chick who comes and tries to retrieve him. And then she's pretty much with James Bond until she ends up dying in a bunch of oil. And she drowns in oil because of the guy who's, I guess, looking for oil, but he says he doesn't actually have any interest in looking for oil. That guy drowns her in oil. There's a lot more consequences. It seems like that James Bond, his leash is now to the very edge that I can give, and then James Bond's still fighting against that leash. And so we got M and Bond are in a constant power control. For one hand, we got James Bond, he's doing what he thinks is right, what's going to progress this mission, and then we got orders from higher up that's in opposition to him at sometimes. The action is fun, but it's too choppy for my liking, and I feel like it's a little bit too long for how long the plot is. I do appreciate the little sit-in moments. I like that, but then it's just like, oh cool, we have more action scenes that I feel like go on for just a little too long, not gonna lie. The only lady that James Bond sleeps with is the Fields chick, the one that goes to retrieve him. I like it. She knows all about James Bond, what he's up to, and still it works on her. And that's pretty much it. He's only focused on the mission, and he's not really interested in the other women. He does flirt with a couple other women, but he's mostly focused on Fields. What do you think of Quantum of Solace? I thought it was alright. It was enjoyable. Oh, I forgot to mention, I was listening to the Quantum of Solace theme song. I was like, wow, this is a return to the greats. This is up there with Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever. We got the Quantum of Solace song. It's not as good as Live and Let Die and Diamonds Are Forever, but it's pretty up there, so I like this theme song. I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.6 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Skyfall. It is directed by Sam Mendes, written by John Logan, Neil Purvis, and Robert Wade. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and we're following James Bond and also Moneypenny, but she's not revealed to be Moneypenny until the very end of the movie. They're going after a guy who has stolen a hard drive full of a bunch of very important security stuff. Moneypenny is supposed to shoot the guy, but they're on top of a train fighting. M's like, just shoot him. And Moneypenny be like, bro, but just Bond. What if I hit Bond? M's like, just do it. And then she does it and hits Bond and he falls off the side of the train and it's presumed that he's dead. RIP. We also got M is in serious trouble. There's a security breach. It goes very public. And also an explosion happens at the MI6 headquarters. M's job is on the line. The Prime Minister is very sus, very not happy with M, and looking for her job, looking for her head. Of course, Bond is having fun time, drinking alcohol, having a scorpion on his hand while he drinks alcohol very fast. I guess that's a game. And he sees some news. He's like, all right, I guess I'm going to go back to M. And he goes back to M. And M's like, bro, I'm glad you're here because the 007s, they're trying to take down the program. Not to mention that there's not a lot of 007s left. Immediately, I like the pacing of this movie because I feel like I can just hold all of this information that is being delivered to me. The pacing is also set just more evenly, more slow, but it's not slow and dragging, it's slow necessary. It's necessary in order for me to soak up the information. Also, some of the slowness of the scenes and the quietness of some of the dialogue scenes add for more tension in between the loud action scenes. And before I forget, I gotta say that Skyfall song, I love it. I actually heard of it before I watched Skyfall. I've heard of it probably when it first came out, 2012. Yeah, Adele was really big back then. And I still like Adele. I like her singing voice. She is by far top 3 best Bond theme songs. I think my list for right now has to be Live and Let Die, then Skyfall, then Diamonds Are Forever, Quantum of Solace, and then I'm gonna have a video where I rank all of the James Bond songs, so don't you worry. You'll be able to know what my true feelings are on all of the songs at a later date. I like how M, even though that Bond doesn't pass any exam, no physical exam, no medical exam, no mental exam, none of that. He doesn't pass any of it. M still recruits him on. I'm starting to think that M has some sort of feelings, not romantic, but definitely protective, motherly instinct feelings towards James Bond, and it's even mentioned so as such that they joke about M being the mother. Turns out the guy who done did the hacking, he's inside, he's known to M, and it turns out that they hate M. The person who done did the hacking hates M. We also got Big Brain Q over here. He looks like a modern nerd. Not like how Q was kind of like a fat old dude. This guy looks like he's a young, svelte, very nerdy, very stays inside all the time kind of guy. And his hair also reflects it. His hair is very shaggy, is probably the correct word for it. I like how this Q looks. I don't know, I just like him, and I like his personality, and I like how snappy he is in comparison to the last Q, who's not as snappy. They still have the same complaints like, hey James Bond, can you please bring this car back in one piece? And James Bond never does. So it makes me wonder, how much money are they spending for these cars for James Bond to wreck? That's a waste of taxpayer dollars if I've ever heard of it. Maybe that's why the people want to get rid of this program. They're like, oh, but espionage is not modern. I'm like,
Actually, all the threats are even more in the shadows than before. Just because you have everything digital doesn't mean that human nature has suddenly gone away. No, human nature has evolved to use these tools, these advanced tools, in order to deceive you more. But everybody, even while they're in the meeting with M, talking about how she should be fired and why she should have the program still exist because they're thinking about terminating the 00 program. She's like, yeah, everything's in the shadows. I'm like, yeah, everything's in the shadows. It's so dumb to think you don't need an espionage right now. You actually need it more now. Oh, just because it's digital, you can still be able to track people digitally. You just gotta have somebody who's just as qualified digitally as the other side is. And it looks like Q is almost there. He's definitely doing his best, but there is this one mistake that allows it so the outside guy, who was not at all escaped, he was captured. They identified who it was. It was somebody that M had previously had a relationship with in the agent sense. And he has a really big grudge against her because she gave him up for 6 agents. And honestly, I think it's a fair trade for her to give him up. I can see why he views her as an enemy, but she was just doing what she thought was the right thing to do. I like the black and whiteness that is exhibited in this movie versus the other James Bond movies I feel are a little bit more black and white. This one is like more in the grays. We got M's perspective. She was just trying to recover 6 agents in return for 1 agent, and that 1 agent sees her as the bad guy, but she doesn't see herself as the bad guy. She sees herself as having done what she did. She sees herself as having done what was the most necessary thing possible. And I like her mantra, regret is not professional. So anyway, that guy's escaped, so now it's up to Bond to go find that guy once again. I also like the power scaling because it seems like the big bad honcho, he wanted them to go underneath the ground so he can get more of an access to everything intimate within M16. Or MI6 rather, so he's able to escape, and then, you know, James Bond goes after him, and it's a fun chase that he does while James Bond is going after this guy is going after M, who's at the meeting, and the meeting is ended when the guy opens the door and just starts shooting, pop, 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 and a bunch of people jump in front of the bullets for M, and it's a pretty fun scene. They get M out of there, and then they leave a electronic trail that only this guy would be able to pick up, and then that guy follows it, and then it's up to Bond and M to lead this guy here. And I like this guy's entrance. He's like on a helicopter and he has like a boombox playing some music underneath it as he helicopters to the place that they're hiding out in. We also learn more about James Bond's family. He's an orphan. Of course he is. I didn't think about his family before but now that I'm thinking about it, it makes complete sense. This bad honcho, he comes up to M, is like, hey, you should shoot both of us. And I'm like, why would M do that? And of course she's having hesitation. She's injured. And then M just stands there frozen while James Bond throws a knife at the guy's back, and then he dies, and then M dies, and then they have a funeral, and it's so sad. And then it's revealed that this is actually Eve Moneypenny is the chick, instead of the other Moneypenny. I'm like, okay, cool, I'm down. I'm alright. I'm interested in this. Honestly, Daniel Craig just feels like an action movie star more so than a James Bond to me. Although he kind of has the same feel to him. He has a lot more rebelliousness than the previous James Bonds, that's for sure. Although it seems like in more and more modern movies, starting from the 60s through like now, starting around the 80s era is when he starts to get a little bit more rebellious, the 90s even more so, and now he's just like flat out just doing whatever he thinks is right and is not necessarily the instructions of the agency. James Bond sleeps with 2 ladies in this film. Quite an upgrade from the one from last movie. And I gotta say, they're adorable. They're all so adorable. I especially like the chick. She has the really dark makeup, and he goes up to her, is like, oh, your boss. And she's like, oh, my boss? I'm gonna be now cagey now that you mentioned my boss. Ooh. I liked this movie. I enjoyed Skyfall. I think I enjoyed it a lot more than the previous movies, and I really like the action. You can really see Daniel Craig doing all the action-y, all of the martial artsy. Not to mention that the colors in this
movies are so much more vibrant than the other ones. I feel like with James Bond, with the way that it progresses, you got like really colorful very, very early on in James Bond, and then like towards the middle it's kind of more samey in the color palette, and then more of the modern movies, they're getting more and more and more colorful, because I feel like this movie has to justify Daniel Craig's existence by overcompensating with the cinematography being great and also the colors being great and the action being great. Daniel Craig is not as tall as the other James Bonds by like a few inches, and I don't mind. He still has the same energy, although he looks different. I can't get over how different Daniel Craig looks than the other ones, but he feels like he has the most energy like James Bond, but the rebel meter is flipped up to like a 10 versus the other ones are maybe like a 3 or 4. This one's like a 9 or a 10, and then his oogling over women, although he's not as upfront about it as the previous films where he's like straight up just being sexually aggressive. He lets the women come to him, but when the women come to him, he's like, all right, I'm here, and I'm here to seduce you, and then, you know, he seduces them. What do you think of Skyfall? I enjoyed Skyfall. I would not want to fall from the sky. Have you fallen from the sky? That doesn't sound like fun, unless it's within a controlled environment like skydiving. That'd be pretty cool. Let me know what you think. I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 7.8 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Spectre. It is directed by Sam Mendes, written by Jez Butterworth, Robert Wade, Neil Purvis, and John Logan. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts with following Bond as he gets orders from M, but not the current M, the one that died last movie. She has a video that she has assigned to 007, and 007 is going to Mexico City, and he gets attacked in Mexico City, and then he's running around. Meanwhile, we have the current M. He's like, yo, Bond, what are you doing? You can't just be doing whatever you want, and so he gets suspended. Even though he's suspended, he's still going with the orders that the previous M has sent because he feels like there's something up, even though M's like, come on, no, you can't just do that. And also we got some outside influences. We have a bunch of people trying to shut down the 007 program, or the 00 program, and then we have a bunch of people trying to shut down the 00 program and have a stop to literally everything that's happening. And James Bond is like, I don't like that idea, and I'm like, I don't like that idea, but we got a bunch of people be like, you gotta shut her down. And of course, we got James Bond. He's going along the instructions of the previous M, going against the current M. And we also got a Q and Moneypenny willing to help. We gotta protect Madeline, who is Mr. White's daughter. Mr. White, he kills himself. And we also get a nice little lead that eventually leads to Blofeld. He's starting Spectre, and it turns out that all the guys from the previous movies, all the villains, they are under Blofeld's directory. Nice! He's got eyes on everybody, including when Mr. White shot himself, and he shows that to Madeline, and Madeline's like, look her eye! And then they have a little bit of a chase, and eventually Blofeld gets arrested. That's pretty much the movie. I will say there's a lot of action within this movie. Wow, it's entirely action. I feel like a heavy third of the movie is just car chase scenes, people getting shot at. And then I probably just said the most important parts. The middle parts are kind of muddy because of the length of the movie. Although I do like the pacing, and I really do like the colors, and I like how Daniel Craig is a very active actor in this movie. He's a very stunt-heavy James Bond, in my opinion. Even though Daniel Craig, his James Bond performance has the least amount of sexual action happening, it's not because he's not trying. Well, he's not particularly trying until he is, and then when he does try, he is very successful, but he's always trying to get down straight to business. It seems like he does not really care about the women until he's with them, and then he really cares about the women. He's really sentimental, and I feel like that's a weird change, essentially, since because he's just so sentimental, and it's such a big weakness, and it feels like
you shouldn't really have attachments like this when you're in the assassin business. And of course, he has the attachments, and that causes some troubles and some conflict, which is perfect for a movie, but impractical for an actual career. James Bond only has sex with 2 women in this movie, and I like it. It's always motivated, it always fits in well with the plot, and there's always a 5-minute scene where they're making out and having sex, and the movie really wants you to know that they're having sex, which I appreciate. But also, all of the scenes in this movie are very long and drawn out. I feel like with the old style of Bond, you couldn't get movies such as this so long, so long. You can only get movies kind of what they were because of all the stuff packed into them and the lack of emotional depth. But this has a lot of emotional depth. It seems like James Bond is really getting a liking to Madeline in this film, and I really like this part of the movie where we have Blofeld's like, ha ha ha, I'm the one who's behind all of the evil plans and deeds. And I thought that was really clever. I was like, oh wow, this is so cool, he's got him. And then the rest of the movie, and also parts before that, was just kind of to me. I think it's a little bit too long. I do like Daniel Craig's performance. What do you think of Spectre? I gotta give this one. It's a solid 6.7 out of 10. I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw No Time to Die. It is directed by Cary Joji Fukunaga, written by Robert Wade and Neil Purvis, and also Cary Joji Fukunaga. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts when we're starting with a flashback. We're seeing how Madeline's parents got killed. Turns out that Madeline's dad got somebody's entire family killed, but there's one person who survived, and so he goes to the house of the person who killed his father and sees Madeline and her mother, and that guy is like pow towards the mother, and then she foolishly runs out of the house and runs onto an ice lake, and part of it is thick, and then you see the middle part which is thin. I'm like, why did you go there? You see plenty of open space over yonder, and of course that man saves her from drowning in the cold iceness. And then several years later we have Bond. He's at the headstone of Vesper, and then he sees a Spectre card, and then it explodes, and then he gets chased, and essentially he mistrusts Madeline and puts her on a train and is like, I'll never see you again. And then movie starts 5 years later where Bond is retired. We got Madeline is just kind of chilling all over the place. A Spectre man breaks into MI6 and steals a bioweapon, and so it's up to James Bond to go chase that guy and take it back, and of course it's always super complicated. What's interesting is that there's this party celebrating Blofeld's birthday, even though Blofeld is in prison, and James is there infiltrating. He's like, wait, where's Blofeld? Why is he here? He's in prison. Isn't he supposed to be in prison? And of course, there's a man with a glass eye, kind of like Blofeld, but it's fake. It's not Blofeld, but he looks like him, but he's not actually. There's also a guy that made it so there's a gas that goes during that room, and that gas is supposed to attack everyone who is Spectre, but everyone who is Spectre ends up dying, and that's pretty peculiar. So someone ends up killing all of Spectre, and it's like, who is this guy going after Spectre and was very successful? We need to go after that guy because they could go after us. They're more powerful than Spectre. So James Bond has to go and figure out who done did the dirty deed, and it turns out it's somebody associated with the guy that Madeline's father killed. This movie, it's too long. 2 hours and 43 minutes for a Bond movie? Man, I swear, modern movies are getting way too long. Not to mention that half of it can just be cut because it's just empty space. You literally don't need half of that empty space. Well, you do need it for pacing reasons, and I do appreciate the pacing, but at some points it just feels like there's too much going on. It's too much stacking on top of each other for me to remember any of it. Of course, we encounter a factory that is very necessary to destroy, and so they have MI6 goes with a bunch of missiles, but Bond's there, and Bond's like, well, I'm gonna leave, and then he doesn't, and then a missile's hit, and everyone is so sad for Bond's death. What's so fun about the ending is that Bond is dead, and we have a new 007. She's a black lady, and when she was first introduced, because, you know, Bond is retired, and it's just essentially like the Spectre thing. When you have number 2 dies, then the next person who is number 3 now becomes number 2, so I assume that's the exact same thing happening within this organization. And I feel like the 007, 654, so on and so forth, that position is very ranked, like
Spectre's is, which is pretty interesting. So there's also that. And also, she's here to replace him. It's hinted that she's going to be the next 007. I don't really care for that choice, just because we've followed James Bond for 60 years and now we're just going to suddenly change it. That's a little weird. But I do like the idea of the 007 not being to his name specifically, but being more like how Spectre is very loose with the numbers that they have. What do you think of this movie? I really like the colors, I really like the directing, but it's way too long and it's kind of slow and there's too much all at the same time. I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.5 out of 10.
I'm Salad, Mint Salad, and I saw Never Say Never Again. It is directed by Irvin Kershner, written by Lorenzo Semple Jr. If you haven't seen this movie, I will spoil it for you. This movie starts and we're following Sean Connery. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I didn't think I was ever going to see Sean Connery in a James Bond role again. But yet, he is here, and he's old, and he's getting a bunch of physicals done. He doesn't pass the physicals, but his doctor be like, alright, you gotta do a bunch of physical exams. So that seems to be the first part of the movie. It's just Sean Connery going through a bunch of old man exams. It's pretty fun. In the other room, a patient is getting beaten up. And then the guy who's beating up the patient goes to escape. James Bond recognizes that man, goes after him. Turns out it's a guy who works for Spectre. He has a handy dandy right eye kind of eye dealio where you can adjust whose eye print he does with the eye. It's like it's programmable, which is pretty cool. And so it's up to Bond to go and confront this man. Also, what's interesting is in between all of the key plot points, we got a lot of filler. We got a lot of Sean Connery not doing stunts. Although it seems like with the influence of the other Bonds doing stunts, he's like, alright, I'm gonna do a little bit of my own stunts. But he's obviously older, and so there's obvious stuntmen involved. He maybe does some minor stunts in this movie, minor being nothing at all compared to how stunty stunts can get, especially with modern movies. Sean Connery engages a game of Dominion with a guy where if you lose, you get electrocuted, and Bond gets electrocuted a few times and eventually wins. Wow, I have underestimated you. It's time for me to pay you a bunch of money. And James Bond's like, you know what, I'd rather just dance with your chick. And so he dances with the chick and he reveals that Largo killed her brother. Oh my goodness, Largo's behind everything. There's some heroin dealings going on. Oh yeah, Largo from like previous films, I forget which one. Oh boy, the 80s. They were a time of films. They were definitely more so focused on fulfilling the action hero quota with balancing the spy movie aspect. I think it was pretty fun just seeing how they tried to balance, and I feel like this is a clear influence on the time era. However, it is a lot going on. I feel like this movie, there seems to be a lot of stuffing, a lot of plot points. There are moments where I enjoy the performances. Like we have this room full of generals and leaders or whatever. We got people freaking out, and there's a guy who's like, come on, knock, 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 bang, 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 gavel, whatever. He's like, come on, I got your attention. And we got this guy, he's trying to be the leader. He's gonna lead these men. And he's like, all right, well, you can pay us or else we're gonna get you. Also, what happens is there's this nuclear warhead that is a dummy that gets switched out with a real nuclear warhead, and it's just like annoying how that's there. And he's like, well, we have these nukes, we're gonna start nuclear war, and it's up to James Bond to stop it. And then at this point in the movie, it gets all Thunderball-y, including the underwater scenes. So much underwater fighting, it's kind of ridiculous. It's not as much underwaterness as Thunderball, but I feel like this movie is very scattershot. Never say never again. I'll never say never once this movie gets gooder, but it's not. It's not that good, honestly. In comparison to the other 80s movies, James Bond's, it's just as memorable, which is to say, not really. I mean, there's a lot of cool action stunts. I appreciate Sean Connery, but you can see his age. You can see that he's limited. You can tell that Sean Connery is out of retirement and he's been brought back to his job one more time because he has one more thing to deal with, and it involves Blofeld. Of course it does. We got Spectre trying to get a bunch of millions of dollars with the nuclear warheads. What does that sound like? And we also got the government be like, hey, bring back the 007s, and M being hesitant, which is hilarious because after seeing the modern movies, I'm like, oh wow, it's interesting how in the modern movies they're shutting down the 007 and M's like, we gotta have it, dude. And this version is M is just not okay with having the 007s, but he's going to because it's on the orders of the government, so he has to bring back Bond, reinstate Bond. He was suspended, but now he's not. Good on you, Bond. Man, this movie is kind of forgettable. My memory of this movie is very scattershot, just because I don't remember this movie in a series of sequential events that obviously lead one thing to the other, which is a sign of a good movie, by the way. If you've ever been curious about how I rate the movies, it is whether the beginning of the movie leads to some sort of emotional impact and decision that leads the decision of the next part of the movie, and then so on and so forth. And if it's a strong through line, and the emotionality is a strong through line, that is a sign of a good movie. I feel like James Bond films, they are just, hey, we gotta have James Bond in this particular location. Okay, cool. He's done it. Well, now we have access to this next location, and we're just gonna loosely tie it together. Now he's in this location. And it's not really a compelling reason that they do it. They mostly throw in like maybe a one-liner that is easily forgettable, easily missable. I feel like if there was a better story, it would have a more of an emotional hook as to why they're going to the place that they're going to versus just going there because they need to go there. And I find that's kind of irritating about the James Bond films. I like the world of James Bond. There is huge potential with James Bond. I appreciate James Bond existing. I like cool guy movies. There's a big demographic there. People who want to see cool guys do cool things, I think is pretty cool. I think when people don't like modern James Bond, it is because there's some of that depth and emotionality pushed into it, but it done in not a cool way, kind of done in an effeminate way, especially with the last movie. It's kind of interesting how that is. But we need to return to cool movies. James Bond's it. Especially in a climate where all the movies aren't cool and they suck and everyone's butchering all the movies that you love. James Bond is there to be cool. That's the function of James Bond. Never Say Never Again definitely functions as that. It is something to look at it and be like, yo, that is cool. I like that. I like what's on screen. I like seeing them fight underwater. But if your brain is turned on and you're trying to think about the through line of everything, I'm just like, I don't get it. It's hard for me to follow. If it's easy for you to follow, then your brain's more ripe to James Bond than my brain. My brain, I feel like I need what I mentioned before. I need all of that. Or if it's like really funny, I like that too. This movie gets to a point where James Bond has to defuse a nuke underwater. I think that is pretty intense. The tension in this movie, although there is an attempt at tension, it's not there for me. I'm just see it and I don't really feel emotionally connected to the events that are happening on screen. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's happening. I see that there's an attempt to have tension, especially in the way that it's edited, but I don't feel any tension in my body. I just think it's cool. And I think it's because I know James Bond is going to get out of this alive. What do you think of Never Say Never Again? What's your opinion on James Bond? Let me know what your favorite James Bond movie is. I'm going to rank all the James Bond opening songs plus James Bond movies in a separate video, so you keep an eye out for that. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun jazz. Keep updated on the channel. I gotta give this movie, it's a solid 6.9 out of 10. Nice. I enjoyed watching James Bond. I like cool guys movies. I definitely think we need to return to the OG style James Bond movies. Those were the coolest. They're the most creative in my opinion. They're the most core essence of James Bond. Perfectly misogynistic, perfectly chauvinistic, perfectly women, perfect hotness, perfect movie structure. Very enjoyable. When I was watching the movies and I was scoring them, I didn't take into account the next run of James Bonds after those perfect movies. I like the early movies a lot. Go back, watch my reviews, do whatever. I want to know your opinion. So, if you like this review, watch another one. Platform really likes that. $20 Dinos, patreon.com/ASEPresents. One movie review for 1 month. Go to the link tree, support the daily grindiness of all the daily movies over here. And until next time, mint salad saw. I'll see you later, my salad croutons and bacon bits.